Take roll, please.
Member Durham.
Here.
Member Anglin. Member Gates.
Here.
Member Winterberg. Here. Chair James.
Here. I will ask for unanimous consent to adopt the agenda as presented. Hearing no objection, we will entertain public comment. Anyone wish to speak about something not on the agenda? Seeing no one, we will proceed to item 7.1. I will not be participating in the discussion of this item, so I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Winterberg as the next most senior member in the absence of the vice chair.
On master development plan of R&D Restaurant, Washington Square, 6795 Washington Street. Can I have staff report?
This property is a Washington Square property that's located at the southwest intersection of Madison and Washington Streets, and it's developed with 6 separate and detached mixed-use structures. And here's a site plan showing the property. And those structures total about 19,700 square feet. The property is located in the Old Town Commercial Zoning District, where there's a preference for street-oriented development and sites that are configured into multiple small buildings. The project before you is a redevelopment of that parcel, and it involves the demolition of buildings A and C, the construction of a new restaurant building in the location of the former Napa Valley Grill, the reconstruction or the reconfiguration of the parking lot and driveways, the completion of signage, hardscape, landscape, and lighting improvements, and the construction of a bicycle and pedestrian path along the north property boundary. And the restaurant design and siting consists of 137 seat restaurant consisting both of indoor and outdoor dining and bar seats. It is a proposed approximately 6,000 square foot restaurant that also includes about 700 square feet of outdoor dining area. And the redevelopment of the site results in a reduction of the site use area from, as I just mentioned, 19,700 to about 16,770 square feet, and that represents a floor area ratio of about 21%. The buildings that are proposed feature wood, metal, and stone detailing, and one of the prominent features is a 3-part barrel roof that faces Washington Street, although I don't have a photo simulation of that. It's a low-profile building that reaches a height of 17 feet 4 inches, and the main entry faces this direction toward the interior courtyard at the southwest corner of the property and gains access mainly from the parking lot. There are 2 secondary entries that link the pedestrian path on Madison and connect to Washington with the Paseo through the center of the complex. From a design perspective, the Old Town Commercial District requires pedestrian-oriented design, and this project is consistent with those design standards for the articulated facades, the visual transparency into the building, and the use of pedestrian-oriented design elements, including the outdoor seating areas and amenities and the pathways that link this part of the project to the rest of the site and the project frontages. In the Old Town Commercial District, there is a preference for multiple small buildings that are less than 2,500 square feet. And in this case, the 6,000 square foot building exceeds that standard. It is, however, replacing 2 structures that total over 9,700 square feet, and one of which is a 2-story structure. That standard is really meant for Washington Street to encourage the pedestrian activity along the main commercial core in town. And in this case, the restaurant is located at the rear of the property, facing Highway 29 and vehicular traffic. The building height conforms to the maximum standard of 20 feet at the 17 feet I mentioned a moment ago, and the FAR of 21% conforms to the maximum of 25%. And as I noted too, that is a reduction in total use area on the property. The project is consistent with the required setbacks for front, side, and rear. except that architectural features are intended to encroach into setbacks only by 2 feet, and in this case, it encroaches approximately 5.5 feet. There is an area to allow the exception, allow the approval of this exception, and that's through the master development plan process. The next element is the driveways and the parking lot. And the driveway has been moved slightly west, although it is outside of the Caltrans right-of-way. And there are 81 spaces proposed for the parking lot, 9 of which are considered overflow because they exceed the minimum parking requirement. And the lot generally maintains the double vehicle loading configuration that it currently consists of. There are 18 tandem-style parking stalls proposed, and the applicants indicated these are for employee use, but staff has a concern that tandem stalls in a commercial application need to be used effectively. And in this instance, staff would propose to the council that the operator develop an employee parking plan for these tandem stalls and then also sign these stalls, and that should prove them to be effective. There are hardscape and landscape improvements that are proposed for the entire site to bring conformity and unity to the site. And one of the main features is a new bosque with elms that are planted in a grid-type pattern. There's also a fire pit, a water feature, a culinary garden, and an art installation in this area. There are 25 trees that are proposed for removal, and those are indicated in the arborist report. They're generally trees that are not thriving or are unhealthy. However, there are 2 coast live oaks located near the proposed trash enclosure. But the applicant proposes to mitigate their loss by replacing them with 60-inch box valley oaks to either side of the entry from Madison. Other trees proposed for the site include elms and sycamores and 8 specimen olives. The landscape architect indicates the plants have been grouped according to their water use classification, and they fall either into the low or medium water usage rating, and this is consistent with the WELO or Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance standards. At 29%, the proposed open space exceeds the 25% minimum. And although the street tree selected is not on the approved master tree list, there is an opportunity to approve a substitute through the master development plan process. The lighting for the property consists of parking lot lights that feature 100-watt metal halide lamps, and these are the highest intensity lights that are proposed for the site. But as the photometric study illustrates, they're well within the standard and are significantly below the maximum output allowed. The other light fixtures utilize low-level LED and incandescent lights. And they're used as uplighting on the stone walls, tree trunks, and canopies, as accent lighting and pathway lighting, and as the festoon lights in the bosque area. The last element of the proposal is the signage, and it consists of 3 building-mounted signs and 3 window-mounted signs. And the first is a 2-sided sign that is suspended from the eave facing Madison, and it would be mounted on an equilateral triangle-shaped cabinet. And these lights are proposed to be internally illuminated. Each side is approximately 3 square feet, and the sign ordinance provides that suspended lights may not be internally illuminated. However, as I mentioned before, an exception can be made with the master development plan process. And in this case, the applicant indicates that these lights would be on a dimmable control for brightness control. The second sign is a Highway 29 sign that faces the highway on the west elevation, and it would feature 12-inch tall copper letters that are mounted to the stone building elevation and set off from the face by about 2.5 inches. The sign will be illuminated by washing the stone face of the building rather than illuminating the sign letters themselves. And this is achieved with a neon strip that's hidden in a 3-inch tall copper pan. This is an approximately 17 square foot sign, and the sign ordinance prohibits neon signs. But as I mentioned before, the master development plan offers an opportunity to approve this sign, and it's noted that the neon used here is as a lighting source rather than to form the sign letters themselves. The third sign is an interior courtyard sign on the south elevation, and since this is this is a courtyard sign, it's not counted toward the site's sign allotment. And this sign would feature 12-inch tall script letters with letters formed in untreated rebar. It too would be mounted to the stone face of the building and offset 2.5 inches from the face of the building. The sign would not be illuminated, and it's 8 square feet. Vinyl logos are proposed for the 3 entry doors, and these would be letters in gold leaf with a black outline, and they are just under 3 square feet each. So the design criteria for signs requires compatibility with the buildings, and staff finds that each of the 3 signs meets that standard. However, we do note that the signs themselves are not internally consistent, and they each have a unique design motif. So the project as a whole generally complies with the zoning and design ordinance standards, except for the exceptions that were noted in this report, and there is the opportunity to approve those as part of the master development plan. The applicant's here for their presentation, and I'm free to answer questions.
Does anybody have questions for staff?
I do. You said that the street trees on Madison Street were not in our approved tree. What is the root structure of those? I mean, do they conform with the root structure that we have with our other trees?
The root structure isn't identified in our master tree list, so I would turn to the applicant's landscape architect to describe the features of those trees and why they selected them for that.
Okay, well, that's the reason. In choosing street trees, it's about the upheaval of the sidewalk, so I think
One of the
we'd want to
reasons,
know
certainly.
about that. And then my other question was the rebar sign.
Yes.
Do we have a picture of that?
Yes, there should be one in your packet. I'll reference that sheet. It would be an attachment I.
No.
The last few pages, or no, it's in the drawing set, I'm
It's
sorry.
in 1.0?
The last 3 pages.
Okay. Okay, fine, thanks. No more questions.
Anybody else for staff? All right, then can we have the applicant up?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and staff. My name is Donna Oldford. I'm a planning consultant from St. Helena. I'm here as the planning consultant for Hillstone tonight, Hillstone Restaurant Group. We have a number of people here tonight from Hillstone Restaurants. We have Brian Beal directly behind me, and Matthias Lenz, architect with Hillstone Restaurant Group. Our landscape architects are Jim Burnett and Scott McLeod, and our civil engineer is Paul Bartelt. And so we're going to do a short presentation of the project tonight, and you'll hear from Hillstone, and we'll answer some of the questions, Rob, that you had about the trees. We were talking about that this afternoon. Welcome back, by the way.
Thank you.
It's good to see you back.
Good to see you, too.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Beal of Hillstone Restaurant Group. Thank you. I want to commend Sandra Smith, too, for her staff report, which was just, it was a pleasure to work with you, Sandra. It's the first time we've worked together. It was just a pleasure, and the staff report was very thorough and complete. I hope I get to work with you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to present our concept for Washington Square and a new restaurant. And hopefully I can just kind of quickly move through about what the restaurant's about and kind of what our line of thinking is in the design. So R&D Kitchen is a restaurant. There are 3 locations that we have currently. They're all in premier cities and locations, which is something that's very important to us. There's an R&D Kitchen in Santa Monica on Montana Avenue, which we'd like to show you briefly, in the University Park area of Dallas, which you see here, and also in Newport Beach Newport Beach. With our approach to design in general is one of creating a very human scale. All of our buildings, especially with R&D in particular, have low eave lines. They're meant to be very sort of approachable and human in scale. They don't make a big statement. We always try and use materials that blend in with the community. These restaurants in particular, R&D, are smaller than, say, Rutherford Grill up the road or some of our other restaurants. The interior, there are only 24 seats, so the footprint is a little bit smaller. We always like to create a building that's part of the context of the community and with high-quality materials. Here in Dallas, you have a large koi pond feature on the front of the restaurant with water plants. It's very popular among people who are waiting. The koi are kind of swimming around. They're really beautiful. We've used a sandy-colored brick on this building, which kind of fits in with the context of Dallas. There's kind of a modern context to all of these buildings. They are all different from each other. The R&D Kitchen restaurants are different from one another, but they all have kind of a modern sensibility to them. And what I mean by that is clean lines and horizontal planes and not as traditional, but somewhat eclectic, bringing in elements that we feel are important to and part of the community. If I may have the next slide. This is the R&D Kitchen on Montana Avenue in Santa Monica. This is a very pedestrian street. Montana Avenue is a very kind of busy retail district that's one street that's flanked by neighborhoods on both sides. There's a very kind of sense of pedestrian quality. We've created a building here that we really feel opens up to the street. There are garage doors on the front of this building, so kind of as soon as we open for business, the garage doors open, and there's a real kind of sense of connection with the streetscape and a real kind of indoor-outdoor flow, which we like to cultivate in locations like Santa Monica in California, where you have really beautiful weather. And that will carry through, we hope, with here in Yountville. I'd like to note the sign here as well. This is similar in concept to the sign that we're proposing, one of the signs we're proposing, although I'd make a difference in that this has exposed neon and we're not proposing exposed neon for this sign. But it's a small sign, and this was actually the inspiration was taken from the sign was from the Aero Theater, which is just across the street. It's a historical one-screen theater that Donald Douglas built during World War II for his employees at Douglas Aircraft. If I may have the next slide. This is just a flavor of the menu. It's a little bit of a lighter fare. It's a limited menu. Hillstone, we always use the freshest ingredients. We have a very sort of strong organization that cultivates good food and good cuisine. You'll notice here we have sushi, and that's on plan for this restaurant as well, but also you have things that are a little bit more hearty, like a filet and the roasted chicken as well. Let me have the next slide. This shows our site plan. You can see the two buildings, the old Napa Valley Grill and what's called Building D, being taken away, and the remaining 4 buildings are kind of in the dark maroon color there. I should note that we will be reopening the gas station. We're trying to do that as soon as possible. Hopefully our goal is by the holidays. If I may have the next slide. This shows our proposed site plan, and I won't go into too much detail about the landscape, and I'd like Jim to speak to that a little bit more. But in place of Building D, we'd like to create a real sense of place with a Bosque element. It features a culinary garden, water features, and artwork as well. And we feel like this just gives a real kind of nice sense of place It also, with the other buildings, has a nice kind of, I think it works well with the other buildings, being able to look out onto this beautiful bosque. It's also, in terms of the way we've sited the building, we want it to be right up on the street so that when you turn off of Highway 29 onto Madison, you instantly get the sense that you're part of, that it's part of the streetscape. It's setting up kind of buildings that are right up against the street and that have a sense of place. We've also oriented the building in a way that frames the view up the vineyard across the street. I may have the next slide. This is a little bit close-up of the floor plan. There is a one-sided bar with kind of a loop on the end, a small outdoor bar, patio area. There's a lounge waiting area on the inside here. Get this to work. It's kind of in the lower left corner there. There's a fireplace that faces the lounge and a fireplace that faces outside for a little waiting patio. And then also I should point out that the kitchen element on the back also has a large series of windows that open to the street. We'd like to have the sense of activity of that kitchen being something that people kind of catch in their eye as they drive by and walk by. There's also a large wine room. And I'd like to point out here that we've tried to create numerous points of access to get into the building. So there's an entry point next to the wine room as you approach from the interior of the center. If you're walking on the sidewalk, there's an entrance on the north side of the building, and then kind of the main entrance, which is between the lounge and the point of the main bar. If I may have the next slide. This shows a perspective rendering of the outside. Some of the materials you see before you, there's a Luder's limestone, which we're proposing to lay up in an ashlar type pattern. That's on the corner of the table. I'm not, let me turn this around. It's a little bit there. It has a beautiful kind of golden hue. It has a kind of a nice clefted face, and we've created the arch structure pavilion-like, if you will, as we took inspiration from wine caves here in the valley as kind of a very loose touchstone for the design of the building. I also of note here, we have triple hung steel windows, which we would like to lower when the restaurant is open, so you have a real kind of sense of indoor and outdoor. We'll have screens up, of course, but just trying to create that real sense of airiness with the building. If I may have the next slide. This shows the north elevation. Again, you see the marching of the stone piers. On the left, on the kitchen box, if you will, you have wood cladding. It's a type of wood called pukte, which is a black olive wood. It's on the edge of the table here, and it can either be oiled to keep kind of a natural wood tone, or it can be let to weather, so it takes on sort of a silvery quality. We were proposing to keep it oiled and sort of in kind of a tone of that color there. You see the small triangular sign that was referenced in front of the kitchen there. I'm not sure if that's clear. And then a low planter wall around the building to further soften the elevation with plant material, et cetera. And, next slide, thank you. This shows a little bit of close-up perspective of the kitchen box. We have sliding wood operable windows. Of course, the kitchen will be screened, but we really like the idea of the sounds of the streetscape coming in and also the sounds of cooking to flow out to the street, to the passerby. This shows the east elevation on top. Again, the access point on the far left, the wine room you would walk by on the left there. Again, we have low-hanging eaves, trying to create a very intimate, low scale. We've created a roof screen that hides the equipment, and you see that here. It's a metal louvered screen, painted dark. And the next slide, please. Thank you. This shows the elevation facing south towards the Bosque. Again, we have the Luders limestone kind of laid up in that sort of light tan color there. The large pier element on the front, which has the fireplace, is also clad in the same limestone. And you also see the wood, pucté wood, on the right-hand side there. There is a clear story monitor that pops up for natural light that flows into the bar area. And then also I'd like to point out just the small R&D sign that was referenced that's on the limestone wall. And I think probably it occurred to me that the idea for that sign, or the inspiration for that design, is the Nickel and Nickel Winery sign on Highway 29 over their gate. It's sort of that scripted metal, and was kind of the inspiration, the idea of the sign. Of course, you have the patio in front here, a very welcoming presence as you approach, and a fireplace element kind of waiting area. And may I have the next slide? And this shows just another perspective of that. This is the western elevation. Again, a window system triple hung, which will lower so that you have that airflow and connection to the outside. Beautiful landscaping. We have umbrellas that capture the eye, and you see the Bosque in the background. Also, the R&D kitchen sign, illuminated with a light trough. This is similar to the Rutherford Grill sign, which is on the back side of the building. It basically washes the facade, and the letters are kind of silhouetted against the light wash. And I think, and then you've seen this before. This just shows a little bit of a close-up of kind of the entry. That's the main entry door and the lounge beyond. I think that's it. So thank you very much for letting me speak about this. I'd like to introduce Jim Burnett, who can speak a little bit more about the landscaping and sense of place.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Oh, perfect. Let's see. Is this okay, great. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to present the landscape for this project this evening. Yountville is an amazing environment. I mean, every time we come here with Brian and Matthias, it's just a phenomenal place. So we're very honored to be able to work on this project with the Hillstone Group. I think that the north side of town at this important intersection could really benefit from this project and from the kind of revitalization of this important piece of commercial real estate. Next. And being such an important entry into town at 29, we think that the landscape, which we hear on all of our projects with Brian and Matthias, is that the landscape and architecture should speak the same language. There should be this common dialogue where you move in and out of the buildings and you feel like the landscape comes into the building, and the building actually kind of extends into the garden and becomes one. So we think this is just a phenomenal location. I think some of the things that Brian mentioned about connectivity to the Hotel Luca and having an important streetscape edge along Washington is going to be key. The new bike trail, which is coming in at the perimeter of the property, will be important to kind of announce the town and the north side of Yountville here, and allow people who are taking the bike trek to come right into the project. Next. Just a bit about the design. The design capitalizes on the connections and creates a pedestrian-friendly environment. And I think that one thing that I'd like to kind of commend the Hillstone Group in driving the scheme was that they wanted to make this, while there's a dining terrace here, they wanted to make this a place that feels welcoming for everyone that comes to the center. So if you come and park and you come in and you're doing a wine tasting, or you're turning in bikes, or you're going to find out about hot air balloon rides, or whatever happens in this center, that this is a great public, private, but feels like it's part of a kind of a heart of this development. And we really like the idea that there's a culinary garden so the chef can come out and clip the herbs for the day's meal, and that there's a fire pit and a sculpture installation, and that there's a water feature with koi. So there's a lot of fascination features to see here. If you kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture, Madison Street will get new street trees. And Rob, you mentioned we're proposing it's Bloodgood London Plain. I know that there's, we'll have to work through that with the city arborist, because I know that it's not on your list. If it becomes a big issue, I think we would be willing to, look at other varieties. We like that tree because you have it here in your parking lot across the way. We have it on the edge of the property right now. There's a few trees here. It's also next to Hotel Luca. It seems to be part of the kind of context of what's happening in this area right now. So we were actually hoping to even pick up a few of the trees in the parking areas and then move them over here when we renovate the parking lot. So I think the tree discussion, as you mentioned, Sandra, could go into the next step. But we like that tree. There's also technical issues of how to solve that with root barriers and boxes that contain the roots and force the roots to go away from any paved areas, a sidewalk or a street. So I think the team wants to do what's right for the long term. The spaces between the buildings really need some renovation and love. I mean, there are kind of minimum planting areas right now. We'd like to expand the planting and bring in this whole agrarian landscape into the development and have trays of lavender and rosemary and herbs in and through the development. So you get this, not only do you get the sound and the smell of the kitchen, but you continue to walk through this garden that stimulates the senses. Next. And the inspiration, well, you really don't have to even explain this slide, but you live in a phenomenal landscape, and we think this ordered, simple, beautiful, sensory stimulating landscape that's vineyards and herbs and perennials and wildflowers is very rich, and we would like to see that continue onto the site. And while today it's a combination of a little bit of a Japanese kind of feel and a little bit of rocks here and a few evergreen shrubs that are not native, nor do they feel appropriate for the region, we think that by kind of wholesale removing all of the planting and starting over and capturing the spirit of the Napa Valley has really been our goal. Next. This is an image showing the dining terrace and the water feature, and we think the water feature would be a stone wall, and it's this type of split face material, and this is a red limestone, and water would come across that and make kind of sparkling appearance and add coolness and sound to this courtyard and really be something special. Decomposed granite gravel, so the trees grow amongst the garden court, and then having a stone wall at the perimeter. Next. We will have movable chairs in that court. I think that court will be very much a flex space for events that happen at Washington Square. Again, on a day-in, day-out basis, there's probably wine tastings. There may be some special events that happen in that space, but we see it as kind of an open space amenity for those who come to Washington Square. Next. So, in conclusion, I think hopefully you get the direction that we're taking. The building is low, it's casual, it opens to the landscape. There's a real strong dialogue between the two. We would embellish the landscape with simple trays and plantings of materials that that capture the spirit of Napa Valley. And, we really want people who come here, whether they come here to go in the restaurant or they're just coming here to find out more about Yountville, that it's a very welcoming experience, and that this beauty of the landscape is a really important takeaway when they come to Washington Square. So, thank you very much.
Is that all for you guys? All right, is there any public comment? Questions, comments, concerns? All right, you guys have questions of the applicant?
I do. I have one question about the other buildings in the project, because, I mean, this actually has a potential to be a real strong anchor at the north end of town. And so are there any improvements being done, even from a cosmetic standpoint, to the other buildings in the scope of work of what you're proposing now?
Yes, maybe not formally, but we recognize that the buildings are not in great shape. And so it's part of our desire to, for the vines that have become overgrown, to take some of those out, to repair the wood, paint, things of that nature is very much on our mind that we would like to do, hopefully before, this project, which take a little bit more time, but do those improvements incrementally. And probably as part of like the gas station, improvements there. I mean, something that really, basically going throughout the whole center and mostly cosmetically to improve things.
Thank you.
All right, well, I have a whole bunch of questions, but I want you guys to know that it's because I love the project, not because I hate the project, and you're going to be going in front of the council. So I'm just going to jump right on in. One thing I had some concerns or questions about is it was difficult for me to determine what trees are being taken out, what trees are being kept, because the numbers are inconsistent between the arborist report and what I see on the map here. The numbers here are 1 through 64, and then you take the arborist report, and we have trees 201 through 264. So I'm not sure if these numbers are consistent between the two. So it was a little difficult for me to determine which trees that were diseased are being taken out or weren't being taken out, or if the ones that are being taken out were diseased at all. So I can pose that in a question for you guys.
The numbering in the arborist report is actually not consistent between the tags and the table that you use to identify each tree. So the tags that are on site have a 2 in front of the digits. So 201, and his report is tree 1.
Okay.
So they do align that way. You just have to pull the 2 off to understand which tree is which
All right.
report.
Excellent. Then, let's see, my questions. You got the gas station. Oh, the logo difference. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Consistency in message seems more important than having a whole bunch of different signs. I do 3 different kind of design signs there. Why'd you guys choose that?
So that
I mean, you look at Rutherford Grill, and pretty much all of the signs are the same block font, format, your front, back, you can tell what the restaurant is.
Sure. It's kind of a loose answer, but some of the R&D idea or concept is a little bit more eclectic. It's more, the program elements of the building, for instance, are varied. The arches, and then you have kind of an eave line, and so it sort of ties into this idea of eclecticism without trying not to be unfocused. The actual letters R and D on the sign that's on the tower element is the same as the actual letters that are on the triangular shaped sign, although they're configured very differently. They sort of have a different feel. So it's in that interest, I suppose. And then the script sign that faces in the Bosque is, I would say, is for us, it was more, it's more of almost like an art piece type of thing. It's less about trying to advertise the restaurant, because it's like by the time you're in the Bosque and you sort of know where you are, and it was more of just like, wow, they kind of, you know, took the time to sort of create almost like an artful kind of piece of sculpture, if you will. And it does happen to say R&D, but the intention of that sign was not to announce or promote the building per se. So, but I could see how sort of the inclusion of all three would kind of have a very eclectic look. But that's kind of the long and short answer of it. So.
All right. And then there was discussion here, you guys didn't get to it, but the bike path, because it's definitely going to affect that traffic coming in from that main street. And I know you talked in the plan about having somebody who was doing traffic evaluation, stuff like that. Have you considered lighting for that period, too? Because it's going to be specific to the bike path lighting. Anybody?
Well, it's something that came up relatively towards the end after we had our presentation. Then we ran into an issue with Caltrans. A new location of the driveway partially was in the Caltrans right away. So we had to go back and rework everything. There will definitely be lighting for the bike path. It's something that's still on the board, something. And the next step we have to work out. We have to work out with the town, see where exactly the location of the bike path is going to be. But there will be lighting. It's just something that's still in like early design stages.
All right. I read in the report that at one point the eaves extend over the right-of-way by 5 feet as opposed to the 2 feet. Is there any way we could mediate that so we could fit within the city ordinances?
It would be hard to do what we would have to do in order to achieve it. We have to pull the building back away from Madison. You probably see right here that's the corner that extends out. For us, it was important to give the building some clarity. The building has setbacks, and to establish a certain framework that ties the different elements together. And that's why we felt it was important to have a continuous eave line. The building here is not parallel to Madison Street because it's important the dining room to engage the view of the...
He's going to ask you to take the mic with you.
Oh. Sorry. The dining room, it was important to capture the view up the valley. If we set the building perfectly parallel to Madison Street, we would be facing the hotel across the street. And so that straight eave line, at the same time, the angle of the building just has that corner project into the right-of-way. To clip it off, it would be possible, but I think it would have a pretty negative impact on the aesthetic of the building.
All right.
I could clarify, too. The eave extends into the setback rather than the right-of-way.
It's a setback.
And then in here, there was a nod to bike storage. You guys haven't put it on. Have you considered that? You are going to be on the bike path, so I imagine you're going to get a great deal of bike traffic.
I mean, like something to lock your
Yeah.
bike to. No, I think that's a great idea. We hadn't considered it, but I think that would be great.
I mean, I think it's going to
That
be
would be-
an amazing location, and because
Yeah.
you're going to get all that traffic.
We were talking with Napa Valley Bikes today just about they're seeking a little bit of extra space within the building that they're in, and we were talking about sort of the new bike path and how people might be approaching and how they might get to Napa Valley Bikes, and it involves sort of, and I mean, I wish I had kind of known about that before, because I think we could sort of have a dialogue with them about as well what they think. But absolutely, I think that's a great idea. We hadn't thought of it.
I think you covered most of the rest of the stuff. Anybody else?
Could you, I know you've spent a lot of time with Caltrans, could you talk about some of the discussions about traffic coming off 29 onto Madison, people turning left off Madison into the entry to the parking area, the impact of the bike path, night turning, general congestion? This is going to come up at the council meeting, I guarantee you.
Okay. Well, I can probably speak more to just one thing with Caltrans, just to be brief, is that it became clear that our previous location with the drive, which was further to the west, which was in the Caltrans right-of-way, it became very clear to us that the amount of process and time and money that it would take to achieve that, which wasn't even kind of a guaranteed outcome, was going to be too long of a process. It would just hold up kind of anything here for a long time. And so the driveway did move further to the east. But, not being kind of, I would have to defer to our, a traffic engineer kind of and perhaps the town, I'm not sure. But it is a little bit closer to the intersection, but in our opinion, it's, you have a very kind of easy drive in, and I believe it's a right-hand turn only out. Right-hand turn only. So it's right-hand turn only if you're going out onto Madison. So
if you're westbound on Madison, you can't turn left into the parking lot?
if you,
I would share that Donna Oldford was in all the meetings with Caltrans, and she might have something to share on this.
Great.
I might ask Paul to speak to this too. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Paul Bartelt. I'm the civil engineer for the project. We've had several meetings and conversations with Caltrans, and we've gone through probably 10 to 20 different design enumerations on this connection. We have met all of the Caltrans minimum standards for separation between Highway 29 and the new driveway. We have all the appropriate turning radiuses. We are making this a right turn only in off of the highway and a right turn out only onto Madison Street. So you will not be able to exit and get onto Highway 29 in this direction. There will be signage on site that will direct everybody that wants to go to Highway 29 to use the Washington Street exit and then use the intersection to get onto Highway 29. So we are still working with Graham Wadsworth. We're pretty close on our final design here. We feel very confident with this. We've worked with the town very closely with the bike path that's going in. We've actually suggested some changes to the bike path that the town has liked in order to make this intersection very clear, because there is a lot going on. You have people coming in and out, you have pedestrian traffic, you have the new bike path. There's a lot going on in a very small area. So we have proposed that the bike path now be separated from Madison Street, so it will act more like a very broad sidewalk. So we're going to be replacing your sidewalk with the bike path, which will be separated with a landscape strip with the street trees on it. There's a lot of different grading and paving and street work that's going to need to be done in Madison Street, so the facilitation and relocation of that made a lot of sense to us. So we don't have the exact 99.9% design yet, but we're about 95% there. A lot of this is going to have to deal with what Caltrans actually comes up with on a couple of things, but we are working actively.
So if you were
with them.
westbound on Madison, wanting to go in there, you'd have to go down 29, loop around, and come back up and exit from the north?
You could do that. Well, you could actually, you can go north on Highway 29 and then come back, or you can go south and get back on either way. So you got two, at this point, you've got two different access points that you can get.
But you can't turn left off Madison.
That is
into the
correct.
parking. Okay.
And you can
Thank
even
you.
go straight across and do your turn there and come back.
That's true.
I just wanted to comment on the Caltrans process. When we first began, your initial site plan in the packet shows that reconfigured access way that is within the Caltrans right-of-way. Not only would we would have to go through a process with Caltrans to have the access control designation basically terminated, but also the designation of the highway changed as well. And this is something that wouldn't just be done through Caltrans. In our discussions with Caltrans and also with Gray Bowen, the transportation engineering firm that the town has worked with, it became apparent to us that there was no certainty that it would be approved, that it was a process that could take easily 2 years, possibly longer, and the costs were, without even any construction, were going into six figures. So the biggest problem, of course, was that Hillstone is ready to do something as soon as possible. And one of the things they're most excited about is the ability to help the town achieve a meaningful retail component, something that's sort of eluded Yountville for too long now. And so it was just decided that that amount of delay for that small, those odds was just not appropriate, because we would have to not only have it go through Caltrans, but also it would have to go to the California Transportation Commission for the final decision. So fortunately, Hillstone took the project back to the drawing board and figured out a way that we could keep this new access point outside the Caltrans right-of-way, that it would also meet the Caltrans standard of being 100 feet away from their 100, pardon me? From their travelway, yes. And so this is really kind of a decision that makes sense for all kinds of reasons. Most importantly, we can move ahead as soon as possible. Thank you.
That it actually brought up two things I thought of when you were talking. One is there really no plan for any signage on Washington? We've just had other businesses come in and not request signage, and then we just have to come back a year later or 6 months later, and they're asking for signs here and signs there because nobody can find their business. From what I see from this, there's no requested signage on the east side of any of these buildings on the property. Is that accurate?
That's true at the moment, but we're working with a graphic artist. We're just not there, but a graphic artist for some sign standards. You know, a proposed sign that like a marquee type sign, very tasteful, but it's just not to a point yet where we feel confident to share it. But it's in our thought process.
All right. And then the other thing was, the thing I get asked about definitely the most is the gas station. And this is kind of actually probably a question for you and maybe for staff. That's going to be a completely separate design or project? I mean, are you guys just going to plug the gas stations back, I don't know what you call them, back in, the pumps back in, or is it going to be a remodel?
They're going to be new pumps. They need to be updated. Yeah.
Please,
I mean,
please.
I haven't seen pumps like that in a while with the rotary. But I think that's our approach, would be just to put new pumps in and then some cosmetic improvements. And then if we, I obviously go through the appropriate process if it's a little bit more involved, and rely on the town for advice there.
Rob, I've got a question when you're done. I've got a question about the parking, because that's another issue that's going to come up before the council. I drove through that parking lot today, and I think I counted 6 balloons above the valley vans. And beyond that, I would say the parking lot was surprisingly, blew me away. It was at least 40% full, if not half full. So doing the math with the vans, doing the math with your table counts, doing the math with your staffing, which I would say probably on a conservative day in July is going to involve at least 43 people walking through your service entrance throughout the whole day. So, and then I eat out a lot in this town, so I see the staff come and go. I'd say the majority of the staff drives to every restaurant in this town, no matter if they live in this town or not. So my issue is looking at that amount of staff, those amount of covers in July, and I mean the season's getting shorter and shorter, so we could probably say October as well. The parking issue that's going to become in this area in North Yountville, and the stacked idea I thought was neat. I thought, oh great, they're going to have valet, and then I kept reading, and you're not going to have valet, I'm assuming.
That's not the.
Yeah.
That's not.
So, and one of the things that gets me about the parking in this town is the lack of enforcement. We put it back onto the business owners to monitor and have that parking plan. So that's one of my main concerns that I think needs to be addressed with this whole project. Because on top of that, we're talking about Girard, the gas station they'll drive through. We're talking about people parking to go pick up bikes, to go on bike tours, and so on.
We are motivated to make sure there's plentiful parking, because it's very easy to just keep on driving down the road. So we want to make sure there's as much parking as possible. We're in dialogue with Napa Valley Balloons right now, and I know that they are seeking other arrangements for the vans. We would like them to have the vans not being parked in the center. It's just not a good use given everything that you've mentioned. So they are looking. We haven't, and we're working as well to try and find some other arrangements, and we're looking for ideas. But I think we'll be able to eventually, for bikes and Napa Valley Balloons, to find other arrangements for their vans. So that should free up a lot. But and then the tandem parking was an accommodation for employees and tenants. And I know there's more employees and tenants than there are parking spaces in the tandem. But for us, it was a way to get a few extra spaces and to take care of that than to just sort of say, all of these, to have half the amount of those spaces, 9 instead of 18, and then you're losing those 9 spaces, which, we could sort of say, like, everybody has to park off-site, but then, so we're trying to make an accommodation in that respect, but, so that's what we're trying to do.
Good. Secondly, I toured your garbage area, or your proposed garbage area. Has there been any discussion with Upper Valley Disposal in terms of their new program for composting and everything, in order to, because a lot of the restaurants in town are giving pushback to that because of lack of space and cost?
I don't know. Have we? Okay.
There has been a discussion
Excellent. Good.
Valley Disposal, and actually we're following their guidelines at About a Foot Grill right now, and so our entire trash composting program is based on what we're doing at About a Foot Grill right now. We're strictly separating recyclables from kitchen compost and just leftover, and our trash area is oversized right now, so it's very flexible, but there's plenty of space to take advantage of what's provided here by Upper Valley Disposal.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I had a question to Paul. Could you explain a little bit more about the change in the bike path? This attachment G, I think, has a better drawing of what Donna was talking about. So the sidewalk has been eliminated and the bike path is taking its place?
That's the idea.
So
you have-
how are the pedestrians and the bicyclists going to interact on that section of?
Same as they're going to do on the bike path along Highway 29. They're going to share it jointly.
Donna, do you know if there are any plans by Caltrans to mark a walking-only area on that bike path?
That's something that we can discuss with the town and with Caltrans. One of the reasons why we separated it is on the original design, when the bike path came out into Madison Street, it aligned with the travelway coming off the highway. So we felt that there was more chance of an accident of a car coming off of, going northbound, turning right from Highway 29 onto Madison Street, and then suddenly they are approached by a bicyclist that's either coming towards them, because it's a two-way, so you could actually have bicyclists, yeah, I could say that.
We know what you're saying.
Yeah, going west in an eastbound travel lane. So the two would actually meet head-on. And so we are trying to avoid that phenomenon. And so we feel that having the pedestrians and the bicyclists separate from the travel lane is much safer, and having the pedestrians and the cyclists in one travel lane is a lot safer than having the cyclists and the cars in the same lane. So that was our theory behind that.
Yeah.
We think Caltrans actually thought it was a very good idea.
I think that probably not very many pedestrians, I'm not going to walk along Highway 29 on that
know.
bike path that parallels the freeway, but I think that I might walk on that section of Madison between the red light and Washington Street. So, and another concern I have, because Rob brought this up, is the bike path making that transition from the freeway, paralleling the freeway, and then coming across almost immediately your entrance to the restaurant complex. And I think that there's potential for accidents to happen there only because everybody, the people coming out of the parking lot are going to have to turn right. And they're not going to be looking left as the bicyclists are going to be coming down that way. And so there's a potential that they'll pull out while a bicyclist will be going by. I feel that there, and this is probably beyond your scope, but it's something you should think about, is that there should be some transitional point right at that entrance to the driveway where maybe there's a yield sign for the bicyclists or get off your bike and walk or whatever, because you're going to transition from this fast cycle lane into this area where you're going to be intermixing with pedestrians. And I think it needs to be studied about how that's going to happen right at that point, because it's potentially a problem for...
We've already thought about that. Exactly your concerns are our concerns. And we've discussed different types of pavement for the motorists to delineate the fact that there's something going on here. We've actually looked at maybe raising the bicycle path as it crosses the driveway so it becomes somewhat of a very large speed bump. Mm-hmm. So we've thought about a lot of different ideas. We have not come to a final conclusion on that yet, but the same concerns that you have are the same concerns that we are already trying to address.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Any more questions before we bring it back for comments? All right, bringing it back to the board for comments.
Well, I have some more comments, I guess. Back to bikes. Let's talk bikes. I think that we have 81 parking spaces and 72 are required. Is that correct? I think, and I think in that tandem parking area, there's an opportunity to take some of those parking spaces, those XX parking spaces, and make those actually bike parking. It would be a very easy fix, solution to have parking in that area for bikes. Take a couple of stalls wherever you want to take them out and stripe that for bike parking only. Because I think, as it was said earlier, you're going to get a lot of traffic from bicyclists coming up Valley and wanting to stop there for lunch. So I think that that's an easy fix without having to actually build out any space for it. And then this is really important to me because this is a walking town, and I think we promote ourselves as a walking town. And the north end of town has always been the poor sister to the rest of the town. And now there are there are reasons to walk up there. There's Maisonnerie, there's the Ponches, yeah. No, you drive to Ponches. There's the Hotel Luca. There's the tasting room across the street. So, in Gerard's. So there are reasons for people to actually walk north now. So you get to the north end of town, and here's this beautiful park that's going to be public-private park that's going to be right in front of your restaurant, which I think is going to be glorious, just as the Rutherford Grill's outdoor space is. But there's no way to get from Washington Street to the restaurant. You have to walk through the drive-in for the gas station to actually get on the access going to the restaurant. I think you have such a strong access from a landscape standpoint down between those retail spaces. It would enhance those retail spaces. It would bring people off of Washington Street, give them a destination at the end of the street. But right now, the way the plan is, there's no civil, comfortable way of getting from Washington down this nice access to come in that entrance to the restaurant. I really think that that needs to be looked at and developed in a strong, positive way to bring people from Washington Street back to your restaurant. I think people will walk up to the north end of town just to go and sit in that park area. So I think that you really have to make an effort to bring people in from the street and bring it to your bosque there. I also think it's an opportunity to tie into the Yountville art program, where you could have pieces of art in that walkway coming back into the restaurant. So I think that that's a very strong opportunity to bring people in. And also, there was a question about the signage. I think you really need a big sign that says, this is the restaurant. Enter here, walk past the bicycle shop, walk past the other retail stores. It's a great opportunity for your tenants. It's a great opportunity to bring walkers back into that space, which isn't self-evident right now. So I think you really need to look at that conflict between the driveway going into the garage or the gas station and the entrance really into your whole complex. Let's see. The overhang into the setback along Madison Street, I don't have such an issue with that. I think this is a master use application, and so we can say whatever we want to. I think the overhang does give the opportunity to cover that entrance off of Madison Street if anybody can walk there. You know, that's why I think that the pedestrian component of that bike path has to be equally identifiable as the bike path, so that people can actually walk in that entrance on the north side of the building. And you're still going to have people from Napa Valley Lodge coming in, crossing the street, walking along Madison, so it's not a non-pedestrian area. So I'm okay with the overhang into the setback. What else do I have here? I think that's it for right now. I might think of some more things.
Next.
No, I think it's a terrific project, I really do. I'm just, I think the objective tonight is just to look at the restaurant piece of it, more, as opposed to some of the other developments. Specifically Building D, I was walking around there the other day, and that building needs some help, and it's got a big empty space, and the ceiling's falling down. Any thoughts on what you're going to do? There's also a mention of working with a commercial real estate broker to fill that space, I guess. I was just curious who that might be, and if they had any ideas.
That's true. I can kind of answer that. You mean, let's see if I can get this door. This building right here?
Correct.
Right now, Napa Valley Balloons has, we've been talking with them, and they've kind of agreed tentatively we're going to build out a space for them right here on the corner.
Okay.
And then the rest is empty right now, but we are working with a broker here in Yountville who is, we've been in dialogue with him to bring other tenants in. It's been a little bit of, it's something we've been working through.
It's a tough market, I know that.
It will, you know, we're trying to, everybody here, you know, everybody right now wants to stay, and so we're trying to, you know, kind of find space for everybody and build it out. And so once we know kind of where everybody's going to be, then it will have a much kind of clearer idea of what we can kind of put in Building D there. But it's our goal is to find more tenants, someone really great. And
Upgrade
we don't know
it,
who
fill
that
it up.
is yet, but
Okay.
that's our plan.
Okay.
I think it's a really difficult space to lease if it's car oriented, which it is right now, because nobody walks through that passageway between the buildings, and so that's another reason to develop this kind of grand entrance from Washington Street.
Yeah.
I think the overflow from the restaurant could go into those areas while they're waiting for a table. They could take a little beeper and go shopping there, but I think their kind of patronage may come from the spin that your restaurant puts on it more than.
Yeah, we agree. I mean, it could be, we thought like a little ice cream, something. I mean, there's a lot of different ideas out there, but we agree.
More final comments?
I just like the project. I think you've done a really nice job. I think the materials chosen, the design of the building, all work really well. And so I commend you on that. And also your presentation. It's a very fine presentation.
All right, and I guess I'll wrap this up a little bit. I have to share Member Durham's concerns about parking. I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing something about that. A little concerned about reducing the number that's here, even though you guys are 9 over. It's just a constant concern that we do have in town is about the overflow I loved actually seeing you guys build in somewhere for some of your employees to park. I don't think there is really any other business in town that has specifically designated parking spots for employees, and I want to applaud that effort. But I think you guys are going to continue to be challenged with parking on this site because some of your tenants are parking intensive at this point. So I want to kind of echo that. I agree about bringing some draw to bring people walking this direction. I am a little concerned. I work in Davis, which is a nice bike town, and I get almost hit by a bike every day. And so I am a little concerned about the pedestrian and biking piece of that. So I do want you guys to consider that as you move forward. Otherwise, I think the design is wonderful. I do hope you guys consider working with the Arts Committee, Yountville Arts Committee, to integrate some public art onto the property. Something that's been thought about in the past. Hope that gas station gets up and running as quickly as possible. Otherwise, I think you guys did a really good, nice job. Oh, and I love the low to moderate water usage for your landscaping, and I hope more and more developers do that. Thank you very much. Somebody want to go get Jason?
Okay.
Oh, I didn't ask about the windows.
I don't think it's going. I thought it was. Did he say? I really. Yeah, I thought it meant the shade. Didn't he say the metal shade? I thought at the end.
No windows, this guy's there.
Oh.
I'll turn this back.
No, I was good. No, I'm good. I was going to look at the scale windows. Talking about going down into the sill. But I didn't ask him a question about it.
Okay. Am I off? We will proceed to item 7.2, design review for ad hoc. Pray go ahead, Sandra.
The subject parcel is a 1.13 acre parcel that fronts onto Washington and backs up to Hopper Creek. The front or west half of the property is developed with the Ad Hoc restaurant, which has a 77-seat restaurant, a 25-stall parking lot, and a one-way loop driveway that runs to the north. The east or rear half of the parcel is developed with 2 residences and some detached accessory structures. In 2008, approval was obtained for a new 19-seat restaurant known as Burgers and Half Bottles that would be attached to the north end of the Ad Hoc restaurant. However, the applicant has abandoned this approval and now wishes to expand Ad Hoc by 28 seats. So the project consists of construction of a 125 square foot expansion to the dining room, and it's in the area of the southwest corner that's used as an outdoor waiting area, and it's shown in this photo here. And the site plan shows in shading the proposed additions. Another element is to construct a 179 square foot reception area on the south elevation, and this would feature a new entry positioned to the east rather than the south and facing toward the parking lot. The proposal includes enclosing a 960 square foot area that's fenced off at the rear and that is currently used as a cooler, storage, and trash area. The addition will be designed to match the existing structure in terms of door and window types, roofing, and plaster siding. The applicant is proposing new awnings over the windows on the front elevation and the north and south elevations. And the applicant is proposing that these awnings be the same blue color as used in the ad hoc signage. Also included is the relocation of the existing sign that's located on the south elevation, and that you see in this first photo, to the above the new window on the new reception area. Parking improvements include removing the garage that's on the north property line for 2 new spaces and adding a third along the north building elevation. The project generally conforms to the zoning and design ordinance standards, including FAR, open space, building height, and setbacks. Staff only has a couple of areas of concern, and these can be grouped into minor concerns and a little bit bigger. The 2 minor ones are the number of compact stalls exceeds the maximum number allowed in the lot by 4 stalls, but there are 4 stalls that can be resized at the north end to meet the standard. The other concern is that the size of the parallel stall on the north side of the building is short by a few feet, but this too can be increased in length. More of a concern to staff is the repositioning of the entry so that it faces rear toward the parking lot. This parcel is located in the residential scale commercial zoning district, and buildings are to be pedestrian oriented with entrances facing Washington Street. And when the original of ad hoc was completed, the entryway was moved from a centrally located position on the front of the building, and you can see it here. It's in its abandoned position for this entry that faces south, and the proposal would move the entry further back so it faces the parking lot. This design is at conflict with the design standards, and so staff is recommending a second street-facing entry in the reception area in addition to the rear-facing entry that faces the parking lot. The other item of concern is the one-way loop driveway and the conflicts that have developed during its use. One relates to the entry when drivers stop to drop passengers and there's a stacking of cars in the street. The other concerns the exiting of the driveway because of the vision that's obscured at the red building at the southwest corner and the landscaping. And so both of these conflicts can be corrected if the driveway direction were reversed, and that's what staff is suggesting. This has the added bonus of picking up an on-street stall in front of red that is currently red curved at the moment. So I'm available to answer any questions, and the applicant is also here.
And I'm sorry, I forgot to disclose, when I did go by to look at the site, I did run into the applicant and spoke briefly with him.
Thank you, Mr. Winterberg. Before we hear from the applicant, are there any questions of staff?
I've got one. The open space, now, there was at one point to be 11 workforce housings on that back space, was there not?
There was.
So if indeed the hotel is built across from French Laundry, that becomes an issue again with the open space, because that open space is going to be a lot less.
It would become an issue. There was approval to subdivide this lot into 2 parcels, and recordation of that map was required to move forward with the affordable housing. That map was never recorded, and we understand that that project has been abandoned. But future plans to move forward with that would create an issue because of the open space on this parcel.
So would that make it not a possibility to do that in the future if that came up?
You know, I understand that project is dead, so it's probably not a consideration, but we can ask the applicant that.
Very good.
I have a question about the entryway. I walked up there today, walked around the building a few times, and the proposed entry to the east is a little strange, but I don't necessarily think it's appropriate to ask for a west entrance. There's already a door there. I assume that's some kind of emergency exit or something. I don't think it's for in and out of customers.
It served as an entry originally, and they closed that off
Okay, it was closed
The
last,
dining
so I
room.
couldn't go in there to see what it was. So the door is not used at all?
It's used for service for the outdoor
Service.
dining space.
Thank you. So your suggestion is an additional entrance to the west, in addition to this one they're proposing to the
Yeah.
east?
We're suggesting that if they want to have an entrance that faces east to the parking lot, which is in conflict with the design standards, that they also have a second that maintains the pedestrian orientation and interest on the street to access folks on the sidewalk.
Okay, I got that now. Thank you.
I have a question. It says they want to expand the seating by 28 seats,
Yes.
but I don't see 28 seats expanding. I see 4, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18, so it's 10 short.
Plus the 10 in the,
There, taken away.
Oh,
here.
the
So you
private
had-
dining room,
yeah.
10. Okay, that's 28, got it.
My two questions before we hear from the applicant, I'm going to echo Mr. Durham. There was a great deal of thought. I was here for that meeting, for the potential housing development, and at that time, we talked in depth about how approval of the burgers and half bottle proposal locked in some of the development constraints for that. So I'm really looking for some assurance that nothing we do here tonight is precluding that housing project from going forward if it's required. And it's still very unclear to me, the answer to Jeff's question, how those two interrelate. My second question is, and the applicant may be able to address this, parking spaces 1, 2, and 3 are deleting the golf cart and bicycle parking that the wine garden improvements provided. The ordinance requires that all parking lots that have 10 or more parking spaces afford bicycle parking. Can you tell me where the replacement bicycle parking is?
I understood that those side stalls were car stalls, or at least they had become that over time, so I'd have to ask the applicant.
They
if
may
were
have been, but I
moving it,
can't
where
even
that-
remember the
where
wine
that's
garden. They
going.
were, in fact, they were even originally signed bicycle parking and golf cart parking. But regardless, the ordinance is abundantly clear. Parking areas of 10 or more spaces are required to provide bicycle parking. So that may be my question for the applicant. If there are no more questions for staff, we'd love to hear from you.
Good evening. My name is Eric Lillevoie. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Thomas Keller Restaurant Group. And I'm joined this evening by David Siegert, our architect from Lael Design, who will speak more specifically about some of the design. I, too, would like to echo some of the sentiments expressed about Sandra. I've enjoyed working with her and her helping me through this process. I think I can address some of your immediate concerns since having submitted this proposal to Sandra. We've taken into great consideration her recommendations. Of the three, one being the direction of parking, two, let's see, there was the parking, the entrance, and now I'm forgetting the third.
The driveway alignment.
Right, the driveway alignment. So the driveway direction, the parking stalls were in complete agreement and have moved forward to redesign that. We went through a number of ideas and machinations regarding the entrance. The original intention was to put the door on the east side so that when people, and the majority of people do park in our lot, right, the majority of our guests, the idea was to make it simplest for them. They come out of their cars, they walk toward the restaurant, and the entrance would be facing them. We considered adding a door on the west, but the potential the draft that would be caused if both doors were opened at the same time, the reduction in space that would allow, rendered that really unattractive to us. And so we concluded that perhaps the best scenario would be to leave the door facing in the direction it currently is. I had sent Sandra a rendering of that, and unfortunately it didn't reach her in time, but David does have copies of it on paper if you all wanted to see. And he can speak to this more specifically about how we've reoriented this design and added some windows to it, so I think it works very well.
So I would hand it over to David now, and then I am available to answer any other questions, and certainly regarding the planned use of the property across from the French Laundry, I can give you assurances that that is no longer going to be a hotel, and therefore the housing element is rendered moot for the ad hoc property.
Hello, my name is David Sigert. I'm with Lael Design Group, helping out the Keller Group with the renovation of ad hoc here. Speaking in terms of the entrance, essentially what we're talking about is extruding the current entry and dining facility out 5 or 6 feet. So that essentially you're looking at this similar entry scheme here. We are trying to accommodate addressing the streetscape with windows at the vestibule or entrance area so that pedestrians can view into the space, see the activity, whatnot inside there. As Eric mentioned, one of our concerns with adding a second door to the vestibule there was the draft. Both doors were opened. It creates more or less a wind tunnel there. Having 2 doors access a small space like that totally minimizes the use of the space. I mean, the reception area is just that, to receive people, and if they're waiting for a table, they need a place to wait. And having the 2 doors there with circulation going back and forth kind of renders that useless. So if I may, I don't know if you guys want to see these. Whoops, see these sketches. I don't know if it's too late. Here.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions for the applicant?
I do have a couple questions. Is that fire pit and outside seating that you can see in this picture right here being moved as the building gets moved out?
Say again, I'm sorry.
There's just some bench seating, and I see people sitting around. There's like a fire pit or something there. I see people waiting on the outside space.
In this area right.
Yeah, just behind that low fence.
Yeah, that's where the addition, the new dining
Right.
area is going
So
to be.
that space is going to be removed. There's a little fire pit or
It'll
something.
essentially become a walking area adjacent to the dining area.
That's the only question I had.
Anyone else? No questions for the applicant.
All right.
Thanks very much. So we are making recommendations to the council for this, not taking a decision. Who'd like to begin?
I can start.
Thank you.
I agree with, I think there have been community concerns about that exit right by Red. Some pedestrians have said they've almost been hit because of that blind exit. So I think it would be important to reverse that. In fact, I saw 2 people today doing just that anyway. So you're always going to have that problem. So I do think it's important to reverse that. I agree with the kind of reconfiguration that Sandra and staff had suggested of some of the parking spots. I think it comes down to the entryway here. I think it's something I'm really in favor of what the kind of design standards are, that we are street-facing. As much as I totally understand the idea that all of your parking's in back, so people are going to be coming from back there. There are plenty of people that also come from the street. It's already confusing because that front door looks like it should be an entryway, and I've had people ask me how do they get in, though it's obvious here. I think you're going to have expound upon that problem by putting the entrance not even on the side of the building, but on the back of the building. It's something that other businesses have had trouble with. I could say Pacific Blues has tried to move their entryway, and guess what? People want to go in the one that looks like it's facing the street. Constantly, he went through a remodel, he tried to move it. People still want to go through that front entry. I think you're going to have a lot of those difficulties with that door that's front and center under the sign, looks like an entryway. I understand you put plants and stuff in front of it, but I still walk by and visually I think that's where I'm entering. Now you take away the side door and you make it a back door, and I think you're going to continue to have those problems. So I'm really in support of having at least one frontward facing door. I understand that takes away, I see in this rendering, you want some seating there. I think it's important to have a front-facing door or a west-facing door.
Next.
I like the new design. I like the door on the side. I think even with red, it works with red. All the parking's in the back. They come around the side. I think it'll work with ad hoc. The only thing I'd like to bring up, like I brought up with the last applicant, is now that you have a chance to redo the garbage area, that you get into contact with Upper Valley Disposal and try to integrate into their composting. I think Yountville has a huge opportunity to be a leader in that, and given what we're known for already, we should definitely be leading the charge in composting, and we shouldn't have to buy our compost from San Francisco for which we do right now for vineyards and large properties here. So that's my main recommendation.
Why don't we make all our recommendations to the council and then bring you back up to the microphone? Thanks.
I'd just like to reiterate what Jeff said. I agree totally. Rework the front entryway. I think that's the main thing. A west-facing door would be nice, but I can understand the complications on the inside of that and space considerations, and certainly if you can recycle, I'd be supportive of that. But it's a nice project.
Mr. Anglin?
Is that west? I remember that the west-facing door at one time was to go out to sort of outdoor seating. Is that true, or never? It never happened. In other words, what was the main entrance to the diner? You kept the door, and I always thought that was going to be included in the outdoor dining area. Is it used that way? Okay. So then there's a reason for it, and I think it's fine. It's also a remnant of the old diner, which I used to like. It is an issue with the entrance into the parking lot, and I'm not sure if starting the entrance at red, which would be in essentially reversing the flow of the entrance into there, is the most obvious entrance. It seems like a back door to me. The entrance that is there right now, I think works. Now there may be some issues with backflow out into the street, but I think it's obvious that this is the entrance to the restaurant. I think of my 94-year-old mother-in-law who just moved here and she barely walks, and so I think about dropping her off at the entrance. If it's reversed from the way that it is now, I would have to drive around, drop her off, and then drive out onto Washington Street again, and then drive back into the parking lot to find a parking space. So I just think that the existing flow of traffic works for me, and it also is obvious that the entrance is there. It's more obvious now. So I would say maybe there's a way to mitigate kind of that drop-off area to make it deeper into the parking area, so you go by the entrance actually, and so maybe 20 feet beyond there's a drop-off area, and so people could actually come in. You drop people off there. The cars are deeper into the property, less opportunity for overflow back out into the street, and then people can come into that parking lot entrance. Or the entrance that's now facing south. So maybe the drop-off area moves deeper into the property, then right in front of the door. And then you walk around to that new entrance to the south. Anyway, I think that moving the entrance to the south and keeping that orientation, I mean, and the canopy clearly sort of tells me that that's the entrance. And so I wouldn't, I think it's a good solution. I would have supported the two-door if you hadn't come up with this, but I think this is a very good solution to it.
I support the design as presented with the following caveats. First, I'll note the doors layout you've just handed us is identical to what's there existing, just moved a little bit.
Right.
I think it would be unfair to say change the existing building, and this works. I think Mr. Anglin
I'm
was...
sorry, can I interrupt? I'm confused which is being presented now.
What we
Is
were
it the
just-
east faced or is it the west,
What?
the south
Right.
faced?
South, main entrance door
South.
remains south-facing.
Okay.
The document that we were just handed, preserving the current condition, albeit that the entire doorway is moved southward.
Okay. I'm supportive of that.
Okay. The existing west-facing door remains as it is. I'm at peace with that. I think Mr. Anglin was spot on. While I agree with Sanders' recommendations in other respects with parking, it will be too much of a change to swap, which is the entering, which is the exit. To the extent that landscaping off-site is interfering with the visibility triangle, that's a code enforcement issue where code enforcement should contact that property owner and remind him that 3 foot within the front setback. I don't think that's a burden on this applicant because they have no landscaping, I think, except some low flowers there between the railroad tie curb and the wall. I will say comply with all the parking requirements. You're not now. You've deleted bicycle parking that was part of the original project approval, and your count's off. So get the parking right. You're good to go. I'm satisfied with your answer that the housing project is no longer important. That's all I have to say. So I think we've all made our recommendations. Thanks very much. Carry on. Rob, you have stolen one of my staff reports.
Which one would you like me to return?
723. Thank you. Perfect.
You
Oh,
la- you
and
label
I'm
it.
sorry. You were going to answer Mr. Durham's question, and I cut you off. Will you please do so now? Sorry, Jeff.
Oh, that's right.
We are presently composting, and Upper Valley is using our restaurant as the pioneer to template that.
Excellent. Thank you. Great.
Shall we have a brief recess? I think we're going to be talking a lot for the next one. And the one before this was pretty long. Yes?
Yes, please.
Come back in 5 minutes?
Did you get Nancy sitting out there for a second?
I read about 100 pages in my book, it seemed, but I'm about...
It was interesting because most often the reason is thrown out there, and you just recused yourself. I was like, well, I wonder what's going on.
It's a statutory conflict. I mean, this is just my opinion. I live too close. I'm in business with the same people, but my personal sense was it's somewhat prejudicial to say, gosh,
It just piqued the interest when you said it that way. Well, what is it?
I got out the map with the circles on it, said he was standing in that circle.
I'm gassed.
What are we going to do?
We just haven't faced that yet.
Oh, what?
No, but we may, as we get more successful.
Oh, yeah, she's the one, for sure.
She told me she wasn't entirely sure in the contract of PVC, and so that's what I did.
She said what?
She wasn't entirely sure, and I had to contact PVC.
It's a little grim, Grady. You're the only one here, man.
So,
Okay. I thought we got that.
Yeah,
No?
finally I tried to
Okay.
start.
Ah, very good.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And
We
I
just
thought
started putting
the
that
gist of
together
it was
this
a
week,
rental
so
interest is
definitely.
an interest like an owner interest.
if you have a lease,
You don't have a lease?
so it's not considered
Oh, okay.
specific.
Okay.
2, 3,
You're right,
3.
there was that.
That's
I'm just going to leave that alone because you're solid, but Joe, I love him, but I'm not sure how far I want to. We're all back, so we'll call the meeting back to order. Before we hear the staff report, I'd like to make a suggestion for all of us to consider. The board has previously discussed this matter, and the council, I think, is as well, that sometimes when we have items such as this that are just a discussion where we make recommendations, there's been a feeling on occasion that the board should nonetheless have a vote and present one set of approved recommendations so that there's a clear voice to the council. Some members of both the board and the council have thought that that is somewhat limiting and that people like to hear all of each person's recommendations. I'm bringing this up because I think this is a topic that's going to have a lot of different ideas, and I'm going to suggest that we consider doing both, that each of us make whatever points we wish to, and then we also see if we can't craft a, if you will, a non-binding resolution on the things we agree with. What do you all think?
Good idea.
Very good.
Yeah.
agree.
Great. Sandra, please go ahead with the staff report.
All right. Well, as you are all aware, we have had a dramatic increase in the number of wine tasting rooms in town over the past 4 years or so. And this has led to concern among the council, concern among residents, and it's an item that's discussed in more detail, it seems. It was in '09 that a citizen petition that was submitted to the council, and they were asking that the council place a cap on the number of tasting rooms, and the council didn't elect to go that route, relying more on the market forces and seeing what that would bring and looking at projects on a case-by-case basis. It did, however, do the retail diversity ordinance at that time in an attempt to bring a wider variety of retail to town, and 3 of the tasting rooms out of these 12 were approved under that standard. We are finding there's some difficulty with these owners having this secondary retail. They're first and foremost in the line of doing wine tasting, so they may be bringing in olive oils or chocolates, but they can be sparsely distributed through the space. It's been hard to determine what 25% that satisfies the standard is, whether wall space should go toward that standard. And because it isn't leading to the type of retail diversity the town had hoped for, there's been discussion whether that should be increased to 50% or more, whether that should apply just to the RSC zone that's supposed to offer a wider variety of goods beyond the tourist, or whether that type of requirement should only apply to wine bars. I'm probably jumping all around here to get these ideas out, but wine tasting room is not defined in our ordinance. It's just the general retail category, and that's applied to the wide variety of tasting rooms that we've seen. And so one of the things the council directed staff to do was come up with definitions as to what wine tasting is, and we've drafted a sample definition in there to try to identify it's something of a tasting portion. It's 1, 2, or 3 ounces. And to differentiate that, we've come up with a definition for wine bar, and that would be an establishment that wants to sell glasses and bottles of wine and have more of that bar atmosphere. And then we've also suggested a definition for wine and food pairing, because food has been one of the most one of the items that applies so differently to each of the tasting rooms, and because of this case-by-case basis that we review it on, it's what they're asking for. And we're also finding the more that they operate their business, the more they want to change that. At first, we'd envisioned wine and food pairing to be cheese and crackers, a charcuterie plate, something small and to enhance the wine experience. But we're noticing that wine tasting rooms would like to do catered appetizers. They'd like to partner with the different restaurants in town to have special plates that highlight the food. And it seems as if perhaps that's going a little bit beyond the wine and food pairing, more for the total experience of the guest, to enjoy the wine but also to enjoy food. So we've tried hard to define that as something small, something that's not for individual sale, something that is intended to highlight the wine. But we have noticed that it seems as if a wine tasting room would be happy in selling a plate even if someone didn't want to do a wine and food pairing. And does that meet the standard we're trying to establish? Wine and food pairing also comes up when in relation to special events, because special events can do catered food and sell it individually, and you can eat this with your wine tasting. And the line becomes blurred a little bit between special events and the everyday wine tasting experience, when events are open to the public or where they're held so frequently that it appears part of the normal operation and perhaps more like a restaurant operation. So we've tried to come up with a definition of restaurant too, to differentiate that. But those are some of the issues that staff is struggling with the wine and food pairing and the level of food service, and especially with regards to special events. Special events themselves have taken on a wide variety of characteristics depending on the space, the location, the size of the outdoor area, the zoning, and there's no consistency there. Is that something that we should bring to this discussion or this policy? And so that's before you as well. What else do we have here?
The items that Senator's raised about these uses becoming one thing, or approved as one thing, and then creeping into another. For instance, the concern with the food becomes, at what point does it become restaurant-like? The number of special events, if typically they're allowed 24 through the year annually, but there's no attached requirement for interval of when that is. That 24 is every other week if you spread them out through the year, but when you compress them into the summer months, then it's a weekly thing, or could be even more than that. So that's one thing we would need to look at, of the number of special events and the interval between them. Otherwise, they become, as she said, a part of the operation, a routine operation. Wine tasting, I think, connotates some education about the wine. You're learning about the wine, receiving information about it. But then when they have outdoor seating areas that are limited to wine tasting use, so someone's going to take a 1 ounce tasting outside and sit down and drink it and then walk back in, and it's just, is that realistic? And most of this is going to be on the honor system, so to speak, as far as being enforced. We're counting on the operator to do that, so they're not outside. If it's a tasting room with a bottle of wine, a glass of wine, a decanter of wine, operating more like a wine bar.
And honestly, all the wine tasting rooms want to offer their guests that level of service, to go out and fill their wine even if it is only a taste. And when you add on the food element, there's that additional service element where is that really still wine tasting?
Yeah, the element of learning something about the wine is, I used to see it as key to these definitions that wine tasting, wine food pairing, you're learning more about what goes with that particular wine, you're learning about the wine itself, and then as you go up the ladder, a wine bar, you're less concerned about. It's more of a socializing thing, whether you're there to have a glass of wine. You may be interested in it, but that's not your primary motive. To have a glass of wine and learn about a full glass of wine, it's as opposed to tastings. And then when it gets blurred, the food becomes more than just tastings. Then it's getting into a meal and competing with restaurants, and so it's difficult to come up with definitions that corral these into specific types of uses.
One way we've tried to deal with that difference of uses and the creeping into bar or restaurant is to apply different parking standards, realizing that some spaces can only accommodate so many stalls and a certain level of use, and that can be a constraining factor. But that's sort of putting all your eggs in that basket. If they could become a wine bar, at least open an opportunity to amend their permit for that. One other thing I wanted to raise that has been mentioned at, I believe, both here at the board, but also at council, is an interest in requiring a local sourcing of grapes to highlight what's interesting and exciting about Yountville and the Yountville commodity, and whether we want to have that a requirement for wine tasting rooms in town.
And a couple of other things. I can tell you that these uses evolve after they're approved. They're evolving right after they submit the application. They're thinking of new stuff, and they certainly do that after they're open and operating, and they get new ideas, and they want to do. They want flexibility, and in that sense, we've kind of gone the full A to Z on questioning, okay, what's wrong with sitting outside and having a glass of wine? What's the public concern there? What's the public interest? And trying to shape the question that way, is it maybe that's okay to do, and not limit them to you're just wine tasting or you're just this. And then they don't like being retailers other than wine. They want to pour wine, is basically what they want to do. They're confounded by the retail aspect of trying to run a separate retail. And we were talking about this just today. They are always asking us for, what do you want? What's your suggestion that we do? And it's really incumbent on them to come up with the suggestion. But if you take something as simple as, well, sell sunglasses, well, selling sunglasses, there's a lot more to it than you have to order them, you have to know about the style, you have to know about the product, and there's more inventory to take care of, more inventory on the floor that you've got to manage, and it's probably not just as simple as ordering up some sunglasses and sticking them out in a case somewhere, and that would go for anything. So partnerships on the retail, we try to encourage that they try to partner up with someone to run the retail end of it separate from the wine, because that's their primary focus.
Questions of staff? Thank you, Bob. Senator?
I just have a question on the pairing, because I think that's interesting about the retail, and I can understand that. I mean, there are two different functions. There's active selling, active retail, and passive retail. I would think active retail would be sunglasses. Passive retail would be art on the walls. So it's there for sale, but you're not hawking it, where you're hawking sunglasses, So that's one element of it. And so I think that is hard. I think that probably is hard for people who want to sell wine to sell sunglasses. So they meet the retail component of what we're asking. But I was remembering that, what's the tasting room next to Cornerstone? Page. Didn't they have cheese they were selling cheese that was part of that, or did they ever do that?
They had discussions about that. I don't think that ever happened.
So they didn't, but they're required to have retail, so what are they selling? Sunglasses?
Chocolate.
They're selling chocolates. They've talked about sunglasses. They had a spice line, but that has been discontinued. So it continues to evolve in the term that they've had the lease.
Okay, so they're
they
having
haven't
some issues
settled on
with,
anything yet.
they're required to have 25% retail, and so they're struggling with what that
They're
is.
selling guitars and artwork and rock and roll stools and things like that.
They have 3 guitars. It's a real potpourri of
Stuff.
other items, but you bring something up like, well, even chocolate, but certainly cheese being perishable like that. You got to be on top of that stock all the time.
So that's active selling, probably, in a way.
And, and even things like, getting back to the sunglasses, people are going to want to know, are these polarized, are these UV 100%, and they want to know about, and you have to have enough knowledge about your product to assist them. And a lot of times they just want something out there.
So right now, the feedback is that the program is sort of iffy in terms of success.
Struggling.
Okay. My other question, and I'll just ask this and I'll let other people ask some questions, but I find the definitions that both of you have tried to set up are really helpful. And, applying those to these people that are here now, I'd like to discuss that later. But what's the, who is classified as a wine bar right now? Do we have actually anybody that is classified as a wine bar?
Well, V-Wine has submitted an application to transition into a wine bar, and that's a classic example. They would like to sell bottles and glasses of wine to their guests.
And they're also a tasting room.
Mm-hmm.
So because the ABC controls the amount of the pour, is that correct? So don't they have to have a license to do
No.
that?
No.
The wine tasting, or ABC laws changed to allow holders of a Type 2 duplicate license, which is the wine grower who holds a off-site tasting room,
Like Hill?
to sell a wine taste or to sell a glass or a bottle. These definitions are in response to that because of all of the tasting rooms in town were approved as wine tasting and the wine pour. So if they wanted to avail themselves of that broader ABC right, they'd have to amend their
Use permit.
their use
Fact-
permit. Although we don't just have the Type 2 duplicate, although most of them are that. I'd say 10 of them are the O2. There are 2 that hold a Type 42 license, which allows you to operate as a bar or a lounge. It allows you to sell both on-sale and off-sale beer and wine for
But
consumption.
that permission is overridden by local use.
So the
permit.
use permit
So,
process
and
overrides
the 2
that.
that have that 42 license are Grosinger and V-Wine. So potentially a broader ABC right than the duplicate O2s.
Yeah, and what happened was in '09, Noreen Evans got a bill through, and it was called the Winery Picnic, colloquially known as the Winery Picnic Bill, and it had to do with the struggling economy in wine country, of looking at other ways to generate revenue, and so it became, in '09, permissible to have more than a tasting pour by the glass, by the bottle at wineries. And then in this year, effective, that was extended to the remote tasting rooms from the winery, the Type 2 duplicates that we have. So we had already approved several tasting rooms as under the old system, and then by action of state law, they became okay to go by the glass and by the bottle. However, we did maintain local control, and that's where we're at right now. If they want to come in, they'd have to go back through a use permit amendment, and at that point, we can add additional conditions. And we're at this juncture of, are we going to up the amount of retail we're going to require, parking requirements, tweak the food issue, the special events? All of these would be up for grabs on an amendment.
Okay.
And new ones.
One last question, I'll be quiet. So this state law that overrode the previous ABC was based on wineries that were struggling. And so you go visit a winery someplace and you buy a bottle and sit out in their grove. Is that correct? That was the intention. That was the intention of the law. But then it applied to the tasting rooms that has no grove and no vineyard adjacent to their tasting room, and they're trying to squeeze that into a very small retail space.
It applies to their duplicate license, which is an O2 license, which is an
Exactly.
extension of the winery.
Right, but
They're off-site
in
tasting
terms
room.
of the use, it's a stretch because you're in a small retail space and trying to have that same experience that you might have at a winery sitting out in the picnic area. That's it for right now.
Anyone else, questions of staff?
What is
Before
Summerston's retail diversity? Is it the additional building yet that is yet to be occupied?
That will contribute to it, but it's based on their current footprint right now. What they're selling a lot of furniture, handmade furniture, so that fills the space, and they've achieved a distribution throughout the space. In addition to that one credenza type bookshelf thing.
Essentially, everything, the furniture, other than, I guess, the wine tasting bars themselves are for sale. There's a big, very handsome, custom-made wood table, conference table, that's for sale.
Okay.
The woodwork, not the sofas.
Mr. Gates, Mr. Winterberg, questions of staff?
I don't have any questions of staff.
Nice job on putting this together.
So I have another question, unless you want to ask.
Go right ahead.
So, what's a special event? I mean, is it?
Well, we struggled
Is it-
with that definition.
I mean,
It
is it-
applies
What,
differently
in
to
reality,
different properties.
what are they doing that constitutes a special event when they come and ask you?
If I
We
could,
had in
I was just going to let you in on I think a lot of them are following the county model, where they call it a marketing plan. And these are the wineries up in the valley, anywhere you go. And when they submit an application, they're required to submit their marketing plan. And marketing plans are the special events. How many people, a frequency number through the year, is there food? So they have to detail all of these. And so when they come here, that's what they're used to. And I think they just automatically started asking for special events that are outside of their normal operation.
So are they like a special tasting for their wine club? Are they rock and roll bands? I mean,
There are any number of things. Originally, they had been presented as private parties, whether it's a special dinner, a wine release, any number of things, maybe associated with an event in the valley related to wine tasting. There'd be a gathering here. But we've seen how they want to apply that to public events that have a special quality. And Summerston is an example where music comes in one night each week in the summer to create this different experience, which is definitely outside of what we envisioned when special events were first presented to us as something that was private.
Can I take a stab at saying a special event is any activity that's not covered by the business's use permit? So it's a
Essentially,
moving,
it is.
it's a moving definition. One business's use permit may be more expansive than another's. So a special event's going to be, if 8 seats are allowed and only catered food is allowed, it's a special event if they want to go beyond that.
If they want to go beyond their business hours, that's a special event.
I don't think there's a single definition that we can say these activities
right, well, I
are the
think
characteristics
so,
of a
but
special
I was
event.
trying to just get a broad sense of what people come and ask for special events. So-
And then the locations are incapable of having, just by virtue of the fact they have no outdoor area to hold any kind of event, and their small interior space, they're 30 people would be the limit, or whatever, 25 people. So it's kind of related to their setting of what
Again,
it could be.
presumably their setting governs some of the operations that can be allowed under a use permit. In your example, the 30 people might be, we'd like to close off 10 of our parking spaces on Saturday for an event.
If they can think of it, they will.
So it would seem to me that the hard part then is crafting the use permit.
Right. And it's a moving target, so you've crafted this use permit and then something morphs into something else.
Who enforces this? I read down this list of outdoor area use, and I have to smile and chuckle the whole time when no is on so many places and when in fact yes is happening so many times. Who enforces this?
We enforce it, and we enforce it mainly when we have a citizen complaint that they've noticed there's activity outside the,
So
what
it's
they
a
thought the
cit-
terms of the business
Yeah.
were. We don't always notice whether they're doing
Right.
that. We have to be there to see it. So.
Right.
And during the day, we don't know what they're doing
Yeah.
generally.
No, I understand.
So it's proven very difficult to,
Yeah. No,
to enforce
it-
them. We have a feeling that a lot are probably operating outside the terms of their use permit, but it's happening under the waves or something.
Mm-hmm.
We good with questions for staff for now? So we'll have a discussion. I'm going to take a stab at summarizing my thinking. Many have suggested that we should let the market dictate the number of and the type of wine tasting establishments or whatnot. I come to that philosophically, tending to agree to it, but I think any argument can be reduced far enough into absurdity if we extend it. That argument's logical conclusion is that if my neighbor wants to convert his garage into a mechanic's repair shop, because that's the most economic advantage he can derive out of his property. So I think it's clear that while we need to be very circumspect about government dictating to business, clearly zoning regulations have a rule. What sort of business can operate in what sort of town? I've maintained that it would be appropriate to have a cap on the number of alcohol serving establishments in town. I'm not sure where that number is. I think we're pretty close to it. I remember in the 70s as a boy, it was a much different business and probably too much of a monoculture then as it is now. I will suggest, as I have again, that these licenses, if you will, be like liquor licenses, be fungible. They can be traded amongst businesses, certainly from property to property. They would need to be granted a use permit, but give them some value. I don't know that it's in the town's long-term interest to have only 3 types of businesses: drinking, eating, and sleeping. Clearly, the ship has sailed on our tourist-based economy, and we need to support that. But I'm not sure just saying let's let those 3 types of businesses be the only one to operate. So, again, I think it's okay to establish a certain limit. Secondly, thirdly, without meaning to poke the council in the eye, it's clear to me that the retail diversity policy is misguided. That's where, in my opinion, government is going too far in dictating what needs to be on a shelf. Establish a general type of allowed business and allow that business to decide for itself how to succeed. And clearly, it's a code enforcement nightmare, right, to go out and measure shelf space. Sandra, I think you've worked really, really hard at trying to craft these definitions. And actually, I think perversely, the problem is trying to be too specific on defining businesses. In my view, in this family, there should be really 2 kinds of businesses: either an alcohol serving business or a restaurant. And I'll say a restaurant is any place that does food preparation on site. If the alcohol serving establishment serves ready-made food, such as might be chocolate or whatnot, then that's also a retail component. I think we can really simplify all of these 6 different subsets of businesses and potential uses by just saying you're a restaurant or you're a retail establishment that's also allowed to serve alcohol. And I think it will really simplify it. Catering, you mentioned in the staff report, I think evaluate on a case-by-case basis. I think it matters where the business would be located. Similarly, special events, case-by-case basis. I do think, Bob, to your point, it would be acceptable to consider limiting not only the total number of special events, but their frequency. If it's 24 a year, but, for example, no more than 3 a month. I've given no thought to that answer, but I think you could have 2 different metrics working together. This staff report asked about the sourcing of grapes. I think that's getting too detail-oriented, too much to enforce, unless it could be offered as an incentive. If someone were to propose, we will only sell wine that meets a 75% division, great, and in return for that, we'd like a relief from some development standard. But I don't think it should just be an automatic fiat that you must have a certain percentage. Lastly, outdoor seating, I really don't know what to say about that. I don't have a good idea. I have maybe a bad idea, which is to say, well, it's like what was said about pornography. You know it when you see it, even if you can't define it. There's a business that clearly is going to have table service and one that's not suited. So whether that outdoor seating is open space or should apply to FAR, I don't know how to address it, but I think we can figure it out when we see it. So that's all I have to say.
I'll just throw out a couple ideas. The types of use are all over the place. Maisonnerie is really almost focused on special events. They do sell a lot of highly expensive art, and it's a fun place to go and all that, but special events seems to be what they're all about. Napa Style seems to be more, I think, what we would have in mind. They have primarily a retail store, and they happen to have a very nice wine bar in there. That's probably closer to what we have in mind. Some of these places obviously don't make their own wine and just are having a custom crush and pouring wine and trying to sell wine. Summerston seems to come on a little bit late and is trying to sort it all out based on current events. So I don't really know. I think that Jason made some very good points, but it's hard to figure out what to do.
Go ahead. Now you go.
I'll go. Yeah, difficult, I think, is a good descriptor of this. I like using the sunglass example instead of the women's shoes example. Or so thank you for introducing that, Bob. Moving from there, I'll comment a little bit. I think that what our retail diversity policy right now isn't getting to where we want it to be. I personally don't think it meets what we're trying to do when you can walk in and sit on what they're trying to sell, or pour your wine on what they're trying to sell. I don't think that is retail diversity. I think that's trying to get around a policy by saying, oh, this microphone's for sale. Oh, this dais is for sale. Oh, the sign's for sale, just to say that it's for sale. I haven't seen that table turn over recently. I didn't see anybody buy it and bring in a new table. I wasn't looking really close, but I think that kind of thinking doesn't really work. Though I have to agree with Member Janes about, I think that's just misguided. I think that is too much micromanaging of a business. I think the business should be dictated at a kind of broader level. When it comes to the broader level, I don't come down on a clear moratorium or number exactly. I think it goes along the lines of, I feel like there is some market control there, and we're going to have to, I like the use permit process we've got going on now of taking a case-by-case basis of what we do think is too much at a given point. I understand that leaves some vagueness, but I feel like that also allows us to be nimble with the market. If things drastically change, we can also make sure that there are changes or limitations as we go forward. As for outdoor seating, I'm actually a fan of the outdoor seating. I agree again that there are over-the-top examples. I think of all the amazing ones, Duckhorn, Paradox, Frog's Leap, just to name a few, that I love their outdoor space, and I go there specifically for their outdoor space and their service that they provide on that space. So I think it's important to allow some of that in our definitions and allow but take it into consideration if they're using that space specifically for wine tasting. It it throws off some of the FAR calculations. I like the use of incentives for Yountville. I don't think, looking at that list, it says Bovigna is the only one that's really Yountville focused. I think everybody else has their wine, their grapes from somewhere else. I like the idea of bringing incentives towards something like that to bring more of that type of tasting room to town. I like identifying and delineating wine tasting retail, wine bar, wine and food pairing restaurant as staff has at this point. I think of the population we could possibly attract if we have a bunch of wine bars. We sell ourselves as a walking town. I think having tasting rooms allows people to go to a place, taste, and move on to another spot. I think as soon as we start doing a lot of wine bars where there are bottles and glasses, we start getting people to be more stagnant, to go to a specific place to drink as they will. And then we also start running into the people want food with their wine. And that gets more complex about, is it a restaurant, is it a food pairing, what is that? I feel like if we start really trying to define that, it's going to be very vague and very difficult. So I do like the use of putting some of these descriptors in ordinances, in what we have, because we are working right now with such vagueness. I think that's something that's come up time and time again when we're talking about these things, when the council's talking about these things, is, local serving. It's like, well, okay, nobody defined what that is. Nothing, it hasn't been operationalized. We don't, what, is that 75%? Is that 80%? I mean, you look at the wine regions, they all have percentages attached to things like that. So I think it's important for us to operationalize some of the terms that we are using. So I applaud it in that case. I think that's what I've got mostly for now.
Do you want to go next?
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Okay. I'm probably going to be all over the place, but I'll just sort of give you some of my ideas. Wine and food pairing, to me, is really a subset of wine tasting rooms and wine bars. I don't think it's a standalone category in my mind. I think that, in the traditional European sense of drinking wine, it's always with food, and so the idea of having food available for people to taste, do a pairing, is a good idea. It also helps with people's alcohol content, because if you're just drinking wine and you're not eating any food, it has a faster effect on you. So I think that, and that's the European model, is that people usually drink wine with food, with meals. And so the idea of wine and food pairing is a logical one. And I think that should apply to wine tasting rooms, to allow them to do that. The definition of a restaurant is very clear in my mind, and Jason sort of delineated it. But I think that people can bring in fresh foods from the outside to have available on a daily basis if they want to, as opposed to prepackaged foods like crackers and things like that. I think to allow that kind of external kind of service, bringing it in on a catered basis, for instance, a day's worth of food for the wine and food pairings makes sense to me. So I would see that could be allowable in the category of wine tasting, which is an ounce at a time tasting, and also a wine bar. I could see that as a possibility. A wine bar, to me, really is Grozinger's and V Marketplace, because they sell bottles of wine. And I could see people going in there, and as a tasting room is an educational experience for the employees to educate the consumer on their wine on an ounce-by-ounce basis. I think the same could be true in Grozinger or V Marketplace, where they're making a recommendation of a bottle, and then they sit and they talk to the people as they're drinking the wine I mean, they obviously have to be knowledgeable. And that brings me to the educational part of it. I think that in the wine tasting classification, the educational component is paramount to me. It's foremost. I think it is an experience where people learn something about the wine. I think it's they're given an opportunity to talk to people that are knowledgeable about the wine that they're being served. And so I think that in my experience, I've always walked away from one of these tasting rooms here knowing a whole lot more than I did when I went in. So I think that is paramount. So I just don't think that somebody should use the model of, you come in and you get your ounce and then you go out and sit in a corner someplace. I think that people have to be actively attended to. This is just my opinion. Actively attended to in the experience of tasting so that they learn something. And each one of these tasting rooms has a story to tell, and they pride themselves on their individual story. And that's the educational component of this. I think that people could come away in a much more enlightened sense after going to a tasting room where somebody really knew what they were talking about. So I'd say a tasting room is somewhere where you can have an ounce and you try the different wines that tasting room reps, and you learn about it. And in the process, you are being given opportunities to have food pairings with it. And maybe you pay for it. Maybe you don't pay for it. Maybe it's included in the price of the tasting. But I think that the food and the active involvement of the tasting room staff is important. I think that outside seating, outside seating, if it's attended to in the same way that the inside tasting is conducted, is fine. I'm not a big proponent of people being poured an ounce of wine and then meandering someplace around, because all they're doing is just drinking a taste of wine. They're not learning anything about it. They're just tasting it. So I think that the educational part of this is important. I think that there are some situations like V, Marketplace, those guys, who are going to build that little corral to put people in, that you can buy a bottle there and you can and taste it. And I think that hopefully the people that run the tasting room or the wine store would be actively involved in kind of talking to them about the wine that they purchase, because they aren't going to go buy a bottle of wine and just go outside. Maybe they will, but I think that it could be paramount on them to educate those people, because then they'll want to come back again and get another bottle of wine because they know that these people can make some good recommendations. So then you pour more than an ounce. So it's more of a glass of wine. And maybe you linger, and maybe you watch people go by. It's sort of like a beer garden in Germany, It's got more of that experience. They have the real estate to do that. I think Summerston doesn't have the real estate. They have the real estate in the back, but they're a tasting room. I guess this is where it gets a little gray, because, they're selling their wine, right? And so they would like to have you buy a bottle and just hang around and talk to them about it. But I think that in that case, you should only be able to buy a bottle and consume it on the property if there's a special event and you've given a use permit for that special event. Because I think on the Thursdays at Summerston, when they have the music, people can buy a bottle of wine and they can sit there. Am I talking too fast?
No, I'm saying I didn't hear that.
Oh.
They're not allowed to, correct? Thank you.
Well,
That's
I've
something
seen
we're
it. I've
struggling
seen it.
with.
Okay, I'm just telling you that happens. So maybe someone that's categorized as a wine tasting room cannot sell bottles of wine for consumption on their premises. Period. Maybe wine bars can, and that's the distinction.
Period, meaning special events, obviously. Not to have this exception carved out for...
Yeah. I guess you could choose to do that. It gets, if you have those exceptions, then it gets pretty dicey, because then they want to have more events, because then they can sell more wine. Because they have these exceptions to buy a bottle of wine for each time. Let's see, what else did I have? And local appellation of wines. I think if you look at this list, there's only one wine facility that doesn't have a listing of the wines where they come from, and that's Cornerstone. I think those guys are local, though, right? Don't they source their wines, their grapes locally? Cornerstone and Page.
Local-ish, but not specific to Yountville.
See, I wouldn't go as specific to Yountville for the same reason that we don't have local serving businesses. There aren't a lot of wineries here in Yountville. But people come to stay in Yountville and eat in Yountville and drink in Yountville because of the Napa Valley. So,
If you would bring focus to that, if someone growing grapes in Modesto wants to establish a wine tasting room for presence in Yountville, would that be okay?
I don't think so. And the reason I say that, because let's say one of the big wine producers, beginning with a G, decides they would like to have a presence here in Yountville. And I think then it gets into a retail kind of turn it out kind of operation. What we're trying to do is foster an industry that, as the slow food movement is about locally grown food, we want to foster a movement of locally grown grapes, and that would apply to the Valley and maybe Lake County. Well, I think Lake Hennessy is in Napa Valley. So anyway, I would foster a local economy of wine, grape growers and wine producers. Not specific to Yountville, but specific to our locale, like the Napa River watershed. You know, I mean, we do have kind of a definition of who we are just by kind of the watershed, you know, so it's in the valley. So I think that kind of distinction would be very valuable.
How about Hope, Charles Valley?
Different watershed, but within the Napa Valley AVA.
Definitely, but
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, it's like Jason said, you don't want to be too specific, but you know what is a local wine. Hope Valley, that's where Somerston gets their grapes from, right? So, but I would consider that local. You know, I wouldn't consider Modesto local. I mean, it'd be very clear to me that that's not a local grape and a local wine. So I think that you have to have some flexibility, but you can get your arms around a soft definition of what it might be. I think that's it for now.
Mr. Durham, last word.
I just want to be
And
clear.
exactly that many.
Thank you. I just want to be clear that everything we're discussing now does not fall onto any of these people on this sheet, correct?
Not unless they were to come in for an amendment.
Right. Okay.
That would be triggered in
Okay.
by something we come up with.
And Slow Food appreciates the shout out. Thank you. I mean, I think that has such a big bearing here because what's going to go into the space between Somerston and Ranch Market? What's going to go into Building D at the new Washington Square? What's going to go into Gordon's? What's going to go into there's still space in James Beard Plaza. There's a couple of spaces in V Marketplace. It'll be interesting to see what's going to go in there. I got to come back to the fact that, local serving, the Hillstone Group brought it up, I think. Someone used that term, and and it was in some of the paperwork here. I mean, local serving is unfortunately not, in my opinion, a reality here. Who's going to buy that lot is someone a company that can afford it, that's going to get a return on their investment, which in my opinion is probably wine or food related. That's why R&D wants to come here. But, we're a tourist economy. I still think that the retail diversity, with us being a tourist economy, is something that could work here. I think I've seen it work in other places, and my opinion is, My opinion is, if they want to be here, they'll make it work, and maybe it's our job to, your job, sorry, to make sure that it does work. It's not mine, sorry. But maybe that is the case. I mean, I think retail diversity could be a good thing here, but also at the same time, I think we need to get away from this local serving thing, that the retail diversity is not going to be aspirin and a bottle of wine. And I agree with Rob that it also shouldn't be the furniture that's, you know, you're sitting on that could possibly be purchased for $6,000 as you walk out with a $30 bottle of their wine. Maybe, you know, I think that there are two types of business. I think everything that you stated on the wine, all the different definitions are great, but maybe that's what got us to this point in the first place, was there's so many out here that there's just too many choices. Maybe we need to narrow it down to just two, like Mr. James brought up, and keep it more focused. And then the wine and food pairing, though, becomes very difficult. I mean, do you start classifying whether they went to Costco to buy the food or whether they went to, you know, got some prepared plates from Bistro Gentil next door? That becomes very difficult as well. I personally don't think there should be caps on it. I think the market should dictate it, and I think that, I said it once, I'll say it again, how do we know the wine tasting rooms that are here on this list right now are even the right ones for Yountville? Maybe someone will close in 6 months and we get another one in that's even better, with better plans that we've put forward, or you will, excuse me, once again, you will put forward. So I think we, sorry, outdoor seating, we're supposed to be a walking town. And by the way, I can't walk side by side with anybody because the sidewalks are too small, but that's a whole other issue. But we are supposed to be a walking town. Outdoor seating's a component of that, I believe. I mean, I see it at Girard. Summerston, depends on what day it is, whether the tables are in or out, so I never know if anybody can sit out there. But also, I think we need to be realistic. People are being served outside at these establishments that say no outdoor service. I mean, why don't we allow it? It's a part of the service. Why can't the front desk person, when they're the tasting room attendant, walk out and pour them another ounce pour if they want it? And make the education part of it on the outside as well. The sourcing of grapes, I think it'd be great to make it Yountville specific, but I think you're making it so narrow that those spaces will just continue to sit vacant because nobody's going to be able to fall within that category. Maybe we make it Napa Valley. And by the way, Gallo has Napa Valley wine, so that makes it difficult too. So, I mean, and that's my point. We're sitting here with all these, trying to make all these different definitions, and it's always going to come into some place, and someone's going to be able to make it work for them. But I think the enforcement is a huge issue of it. I think the enforcement is a big issue with however you choose to move forward and the town chooses to move forward. We need to ensure that it's enforced. So that's it.
I was going to comment that
Please do.
enforcement is, to the extent we can launch these things on their own, they're off operating, and it doesn't require a lot of enforcement. That's the ideal, because there's not a lot of us. We're not here on weekends. We're not here at nights. We have limited sheriff's coverage, and so a system that requires heavily on enforcement is difficult. The other thing on the retail diversity I wanted to comment but didn't before you started your comments is, and I think it's pretty evident already what's happening there is we're trying to take something that's a market-driven desire out there that's seen as being successful or high probability of success, and trying to co-opt that with something that we're not getting otherwise. People are not coming in here with bookstores and shoe stores, and we never hear that. I've never, in the last 6-7 years, nobody has said, I want to open up a bookstore or a shoe store. So
I'll tell you, if Rosalie leaves, my wife leaves. So maybe that's where the female shoe store came from.
So the idea there is to kind of hitch our star to something that's already taking a rocket ride in the market, and try to, the extent we can, go off that and get something we do find more desirable, at least in the sense of not having the monoculture and avoiding that we have something else for visitors and residents, whether it's whatever that may be, that it's not just, as you were pointing out, 3 uses and coming down to that.
Maybe we each hear what we want to hear, but Jeff just mentioned, and I think several other people did as well, the difficulty of enforcement, which you just talked about. Unless the town's prepared to hire a full-time code enforcement officer, to me, that difficulty of enforcement is another reason to have fewer, simpler definitions. Not have a business that has 12 different metrics it must meet to comply with its use permit, and have 6 of those different sorts of uses. So, again, I may be hearing what I want to hear, but I think that's an argument for simpler and fewer business-type definitions. With more...
But that goes back to this sheet. This sheet's the perfect example. And when I say enforcement, that's what it comes down to, is every single one of these people on here, there's something different about every single one. You know, and it's... If there were fewer definitions, if there were fewer ways they could do things, my whole point with the retail diversity, too, and them coming in, if they want to be in here, in my opinion, if they want to be in here bad enough, they'll make it work. So they can complain all day long about the perishable cheese or the lack of their knowledge of how to market sunglasses. But in my opinion, if we do want local serving business, if we do want something more than 3 businesses, then we need to make it work with what's working for this town, which is all the tourists coming in, which they've been doing nonstop this whole week, and the seasons are getting longer and longer. They're going to continue to come here. If these wine tasting rooms want to get, because they're stuck up on a mountain somewhere, want to be in the heart of Yountville, which just experienced one of its highest TOTs ever, especially over last year, I think it was a 16% increase. Maybe we do dictate to the businesses a little bit what they need to do to be here. And I have a feeling quite a few of them will try to make it work. That's my opinion.
Anything else?
I do want to point out, I find it sad that, for example, I'm not exactly sure what the business decision was about it, but I'd love for businesses like Tamber Bay, instead of going to Calistoga, to be here. I mean, they're not technically in our city limits, but they're one of the closest wineries around, and they didn't even come here. So I'd love to be able to find ways to bring some of those localer wineries and tasting rooms into town as well.
We were in discussions with them for at least 6 months when they gave up on town and moved to St. Helena.
Okay.
Why?
Some of the discussion of what's required to come to town, but also the lack of space. I have to say, they embrace the retail diversity concept wholeheartedly. They partnered with another business that was going to take that on, and so it seemed like it was going to be feasible and work, and we were excited from that perspective. The wine tasting rooms see Yountville as a challenge based on what we're piling on them.
Right.
That's kind of the other side of the coin on this, is that business people want certainty. They don't want surprises. They don't, and a lot of times it's not even so much what it is, they just want to know what it is. And when we have, as we've been going along, it's kind of case by case, and that's how, and then it flares up. Do we have too many? And that's concerning to business people.
That we have too many?
Well,
for the current ones who are already here?
That the rules could change at any time.
But they...
Do you mean too many, like,
ones
too many
that aren't
rubrics?
permitted.
Okay.
That are we going to have a cap? We're going to do case by case still. It's in flux. The question of tasting rooms in Yountville.
increasing the retail requirement.
Which I think all speaks to a little bit of what Member James was getting at about maybe clarity and simplicity, I guess.
Can't wait to see the ice cream shop at Building D.
Did Tamber Bay ultimately decide to go to St. Helena because of the space that was available here, or was it the process that they...
It could have been the space. They were very interested in Washington Square, and given the turnover and the purchase of that property, I think they couldn't get an answer.
So the management...
And there's very little availability otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue here. For someone that wants to open a tasting room and has an idea about what it would be, there's not a lot of space.
No. And Jeff mentioned some of the vacancies, but B Marketplace doesn't want wine tasting. Edward James can't have a second based on the lease with Hope and Grace, so there might be
So
stuff
there
out
they
there.
sit vacant.
Yeah.
Because no local serving business, no other
fill
businesses
it.
coming in.
It's a Keller restriction, is that... What's the restriction on Thomas James?
It's in the Hope and Grace lease that they're the only
Oh, really?
tasting room in the property.
Oh, interesting. So I you know, it's this kind of predictability is always an issue. I mean, as an architect, we always hope for predictability, and it's an elusive character. You never get it. You know, even though you think you know the codes, somebody's there to interpret it in a way that you've never heard before. So, I mean, it comes with the territory. I don't think that you can have it so that it's so black and white that it is predictable. So I think that people that go into the process understand that there's an unpredictability even in the predictability of what you think you're going through. So, you know, I think...
Known unknowns, Mr. Rumsfeld?
That's right. So I think that, you know, it is an issue of the space available. I mean, it's a constellation of a lot of different things that people make decisions, yes or yay or nay, about being here or not. I think Jason was right. I think maybe simplicity is what we're all trying to get, and so to that end, maybe what we said tonight will help or confuse it. I don't know. But I do think it's a business. I love to see all the people on the street, and I think a component of that is because of the tasting rooms. You know, there is foot traffic in this town now, and it's because of, I think, people staying in the inns, and I think people walking to the restaurants instead of driving. But I do think that the tasting rooms have a component in that activity on the street, and it's enlivening. It's enlivening to see that. The art program has a presence. I mean, it's created a huge presence with people walking through town. So I think we're doing some stuff right. You know, this is hard because we're making it hard, I think, in a way, to deal with this issue of wine tasting. I think what we tried to do tonight is to make some definitions, and you certainly led the way in helping us to deal with that. And I think this is the right process. I don't think a moratorium is the right process. I don't think a cap's the right process. But I do think a clarity in terms of what we understand this to be, so it helps us as we go forward with the next applicant, is important.
I think I've been remiss. You all have been sitting here for a long time. Would you like to say something?
You said it all. You should. It is confusing.
Please, Bruce, come on up.
It's Bruce Peters, Portofino Realty. I've handled probably, of the last 5 transactions in this town, commercial transactions, I've handled 5 of them, of which 3 of those had gone through two rotations of buying and selling. And I think I have a fairly good pulse of, where retailers or commercial people are looking. In fact, I'm involved with the lot that you made reference to next to the market, and that is in contract, and it will be closing. And that is to outside investors that will be coming into this town, with no specific identification of what they want to do with it. But Rob Engwin, you brought up a very good point. there's very little space left. So you've got to really ask, why are we even having this discussion? It's not like we're annexing 100 acres next door that we're going to spread the town out. We're really talking about putting a limitation on something that's already limited within its own being. The V Marketplace, absolutely. Non-competitive clauses in the lease with Thomas Keller. You're talking about very few people that have the financial ability to come in here and do that. So what are we really talking about, having a control over something that is only going to be maybe one or two entities that might come into existence? And I think Jeffrey brought up the fact that when he looked at this menagerie of people sitting here, all of which have different rules to the game that they're playing, and I'm going, so we want to totally, squeeze the last two guys coming into this thing, and everybody else has this incredible flow of operation that they can do. And I agree, the marketplace should judge it. There might be 6 months from now, one of these people are going to fall out because the people don't like their product. But to try to force someone to sit there and take on, and I understand that we want this diversity. We'd be far better off if we took the empty space over there in Keller's Place and took all the wine guys and said, listen, give us some money, let's rent this, and that chocolate that you want we'll put over there, and the glasses you want we'll put over there, and we'll make sort of an emporium over there and get you back to what you really do well. Sell wine, get people in this town that want to try your wine, stay in that hotel and eat in that restaurant. That's the thing, that I think if we throw too much of it out there, we're trying to squeeze this round circle into this square hole, and if it's bigger, it just doesn't fit. And it makes it for this diversity that we want, retail diversity, to really make almost like a bunch of pawn shops. I'm selling wine, but I've got these guitars over here that I have on a discount sale now because no one wants to buy them. That's, to me, a bad picture. Instead of sitting there having your wine on display and trying to sell it, and then have somebody out there that we have an emporium type facility. So I really applaud you guys and Sandra and Bob in trying to come up with something, because there is such a hodgepodge out there. But you're right. If we did have you're either classified as a wine bar, wine tasting, or a restaurant, I think that can be there, because a lot of these wine tasting rooms will probably want to convert to wine bar. And, I think that you should have some definition for that and clarity. But giving them the ability to have their own drawing, which draws people here. Events draw people here. Wine tasting, food draw people here. I mean, we close the streets of this town only to do what? When we're having our big Yountville Day. I don't see little boutique shops selling skirts and T-shirts. It's wine, food, wine, food, wine, food, wine, food. Now, if we really didn't like that, then why would we invite these guys here? To close this town down, only to invite the people to come here and drink wine, eat food, and see what else we have here. So I just wish that we have some openness to give these entrepreneurs the ability to exercise what they do the best and hopefully be successful. And our TOT tax will go up, our sales tax will go up, and hopefully the admiration for this town goes up. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Anyone else? Want to crack? Okay, we'll move on. No public hearings tonight. Staff report.
Did you want to come to a resolution?
Thank you.
Of some sort?
Thank you.
I know it's getting late and all, but
I'm at a loss to try to, I know there's several points of agreement, but I'm at a loss to try to summarize them.
I heard a couple as far as the grape sourcing being more local to the valley, or perhaps the county, that would pull in the other valleys outside this watershed. And that the idea of outdoor seating and vitality on the street is a good thing for town. Heard kind of a mixed picture on retail diversity. Seemed like most were we're thinking that it's a good tool.
That setting up use permits on enforceability issues is problematic in the long run.
The food was, I wasn't clear on, I didn't get a clear read on if there's any changes there. I did appreciate that when you pointed out, if you look at that list, everyone's so unique, and trying to craft rules that everyone would more or less conform to, it would be very difficult. A lot of it has to do with the setting and the size of the facility and whether they could have events, have food. That's certainly case by case. I think there is a concern out there, though, that of when food gets to a certain point, it becomes restaurant-like, and that's not appreciated in other sectors of the community.
But the food doesn't necessarily have to be restricted to just pre-packaged and whatever.
I think it's also, I mean, the food, just to address that part of it, it's a portion control. It's the portion that you are tasting. I mean, you're limiting the amount of wine you're drinking. Why not limit the amount of food that you're tasting with it? It's an experience. It's not a feed. This is not a luncheon. It's not a dinner. You're having the experience of having this wine with that food. And each of those is in a very small portion. It's portion control. I think you should look at it that way.
And we can take that back to the council, that concept of portion, although the first time we ran it by them, there was some consternation on what's a bite, what is that, how much is that? Couldn't you, I mean, there were all these scenarios of tapas plate style service to where before you know it, you've got 6 plates in front of you and you've just had a meal and it's like
then
a
you're
restaurant.
eating, you're not doing a tasting.
Right.
It's an eating experience. It's not the primary experience is tasting wine, and you're getting that experience of, and it's only a small experience, of the food interacting with the wine. You're not piling up plates. You're getting to see how wine reacts and interacts with food. That's what it's about.
I think there's agreement on that. It's how do you get that?
I'm sorry, what?
I think there's agreement on that concept of want it to be about wine. How do you get that? I think is the question.
I think you have a scale there, and if it's over an ounce of food, then it sets off an alarm.
Digital scale on every table, check.
I'll go enforce that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we can craft one
But the idea
thing
is
that
setting
we
by an
can.
ugly fact.
Well, I think it's an exploration by all of us of what this is, and I just don't think we can make it in black and white.
I also heard the idea associated with the use of outdoor spaces that the notion of having a tasting of 1 ounce, 2 ounce quantity in a glass that's removed from the bar or anyone telling you about it is an okay thing. That I heard that a couple of times. I don't know if that's a consensus.
No, I mean, my comment was that if there's an active involvement by the tasting room staff in the educational process outside, that's great. But what I said was to let people come in, get an ounce of wine, go out and sit outside, and then when they're done with that, come back in. Where's the experience? They're just chugging wine.
Yeah, I think what happens, though, is, and again, I think businesses want to be as flexible as possible. A couple comes in, they have a tasting, and then they go, that's good. Can we get a bottle of that and sit here and drink it? And the proprietor says whatever they say.
What would you say? I mean, what do you allow them to do? Not to do that.
On that note, I think we've shot our bull.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm going to move along to item number 9. Are there staff reports? Board reports?
I do want to bring up what I brought to the attention of staff earlier today, that there were additional signs added to the outside of Summerston that we had not approved. And I asked staff about that, and I think it's been remedied at this point.
They were non-approved signs, and we let them know if they were to be permanent signs, they'd have to have approval for it. That's where we were at.
They indicated that they eventually would like to have them in the courtyard area during maybe events to where there's those brands represented, but those would not be subject to, because they're in the courtyard, a sign approval.
They just cluttered up those front pillars.
I would agree.
Any objection to adjournment? Good night, everybody. See you next month.
Thank you, Jason.